Hey, everybody.
Howdy ho. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. It's not the last Thursday quite yet.
Next week.
Next week is the last Thursday, but we're here for another episode of Last Thursday.
Indeed.
Despite the fact that we had to cancel last week.
We did.
Yeah, due to my ear infection, ear ache, ear ailment, whatever you want to call it. But I'm feeling much better. And
yes, you are.
Grateful for it because boy, oh boy, was that an adventure. Dark night of the soul, I would say.
Oh, I know. It really was. It was hard for me to see it, to be honest.
Yeah, you were very helpful, though, and very supportive.
We can get into that after we thank our patrons real quick.
Yes, let's do that.
So if you're a patron, thank you so much. This includes Chance, Benna, Inland Sea, Liam, Amy, Miriam Hank, Jenny G, Erica, Moonlander Spoons, Mary, Catherine, Logan, Lilivine, Debbie, Natasha, MB, Nausicaa, and Stephanie. You guys are appreciated.
Yeah. Thank you all.
And obviously, if you guys want to support the channel, you can do so at patreon.com/thehealinghome. And with that said, let me change the screen here. And here we are.
What's up, everybody? Good to see you.
Yes. Great to see everybody.
Yeah.
But as you were saying, yeah, that was really rough for you.
Yeah, it was. It was one of the rougher things I've gone through in a while, on like a physical level, I'd say, pain-wise.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it was emotional, too. You know, there's no way that you have physical pain that doesn't come with emotions, you know, so that was a whole ball of wax for sure.
Totally.
But it was a really good, every time something like that happens, I always take it as a way to reevaluate things. So reevaluate the way I look at my health, reevaluate my thoughts, reevaluate everything. And so I did that because I had a lot of time to think. But a lot of time was spent not being able to think, to be honest. I wasn't able to focus much on a lot of things besides getting better. So,
right.
Yeah. I'm grateful that I had the time and space to be able to do that. So,
well, I know it's really funny because we went through similar sorts of things.
We did.
I got sick going to your hometown.
Yep.
Or during, rather, I would say.
Yeah.
During a trip to Milwaukee, and we were going for a family wedding, and then I dealt with that for several weeks, kind of still dealing with that in some ways. And then you came to California with me for a family wedding, one of my cousins, and then you dealt with your ear issue when you came back. So I don't know, just one right after another, very similar sorts of things going on.
Yeah.
Different ailments.
Ailments, but trippy that it's just trippy about how it plays out.
So a lot of the things you're talking about, being frustrated that you couldn't do anything, frustration having to do with like lack of motivation, stuff like that. It's like I knew exactly what you're talking about because I was just there.
Yeah, and we talked about that while you were going through it, and like that feeling of like feeling lazy or feeling like whatever, or you're not getting enough done, should be doing something.
You don't have time to relax and get better.
Right, and so it's so funny because both you and I we're always doing something, and we do it in our own ways. We're always working on something at all times usually, and so to not do that, it feels weird. It feels weird to kind of be like, whoa, what? I like can't do something right now because I'm literally being physically, hindered by something, but also spiritually being told to not do anything.
Right.
Like just being told continuously to sit down and rest or whatever. And for me, my stuff is usually more physical. So I'm a very physical person in the way that I'm always up, out, doing something, making something, working on something in the yard, in the garden, in the house. You name it, I'm very physical. Or I'm hiking or walking or doing something.
Right.
And being sick is like I wasn't even able to do any of those things.
Well, I've said it before, knowing you the way I do. Your chart and everything else, and just your personality type, it leans way more towards earth than any of the other elements. And so I found with you that I really think, and it makes so much sense, that you see your value with the things you can physically create and the things you can physically do, where I'm more mental, emotional. And so I can live in that world a little bit more, I think, kind of exclusively sometimes.
Right.
To my detriment, too. So it's just kind of like we all have our things like that. But I just know that physicality and your own physical space and being able to produce and create on that level, I think is just more how you identify and see the world.
Yeah. And
it's your relationship with the world, actually.
It's true. You're right.
Yeah.
Totally. To my detriment sometimes. Where I can be too physical. I can be too...
it's your
too earthy.
Just like with everybody, it's partly your blessing and your curse.
Yeah,
it can be
right
if you let it go unchecked or you're unbalanced or whatever.
Totally.
Yeah.
So.
Well, right on. Let's get to some drinks because they look really good.
Yeah.
And then we can say what's up to the people in the chat.
Sounds good.
See what's good.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So I made kind of like a virgin old fashioned. Sort of like a Shirley Temple, I guess, but it leans more on a virgin old fashioned in the like a brandy old fashioned.
Okay.
Because I added some cardamom, orange, and burdock bitters to this drink that I made.
Sweet.
So it's a nice little fancy mocktail.
Cheers. Thank you.
Oh yeah.
I'm into it.
That's good. You can really taste the bitters, which is awesome. It breaks up the sweetness. Yeah. Orange, cardamom, and burdock bitters. Highly recommend it.
Oh, yeah.
Very easy to make.
Nice.
But it's a really good flavor combination if you're into bitters. It's a great one.
Thank you for making that. So let's say hi to the chat real quick.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. If you are here live, thank you. We appreciate it.
And Mario is streaming to Symbolic Studies on YouTube for the first time, actually.
Totally.
With last Thursday, so that's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're catching it on Symbolic Studies, hello, welcome. This is my girl, Michelle. We go live and we talk about weird stuff, generally, hopefully, actually. So artist seer Miri is here. Miri, thank you so much for your package. She sent me this awesome package for my solar return, and she included a tarot deck right here. Very cool. I might have to get into this at some point. It's a very different kind of deck. It's like a hybrid deck. It has a major arcana that I've never, ever, ever seen before. But thank you for that. And then she also included some a lot of just like correspondences with my birthday and chart stuff and what I can expect over the next year or whatever.
Yeah, with the Cards of Destiny.
Cards of Destiny. Thank you.
Miri, you should really lean into the Cards of Destiny. Seriously, all the readings that you always do of those are so accurate and on point. And as soon as Mario read his, he was like, oh my God, this is like totally exactly how I'm feeling this year. So lean into that. And I think that is just such a great service that you provide.
It was really accurate.
Yeah, it was. It was for yours this year. Anytime she's done it for me in the past, I'm always just kind of like, wow.
The Cards of Destiny stuff really has been like, I feel like some of the most potent stuff that I've come across in terms of people kind of giving me a forecast of things.
Right.
It seems like it's just really, really accurate. So that's great. Thank you once again. Nicholas, what's good? Thanks for being here.
What's up, Nicholas? Haven't seen you in a while. It's good to see you.
Nicholas, that's really cool. So he just says here, Mario blew my mind with the set talk. Cheers. That's awesome, dude. I'm really happy to hear that. I feel like there's more to come with me and GB. He's a wealth of information, and I like his story and his perspective with certain things. So I actually just reached out to him today and said, hey, we should do it again. Maybe in a few months or something like that. So I'm glad you got something out of that. Hank, Flat Earth Hippie, what's good, dude? Nice to see you, as usual.
What's up, Hank?
Tattoo Dave, Moonlander is here. What's good?
Howdy, Dave.
We are glad to be back for sure. So Katrina, Emmanuel, hello.
Welcome to last Thursday.
Yes, greetings. Michelle is here. Hello. So we've got Josh with a branch. What's good, dude?
What's up, Michelle and Joshua?
Nice to see you, dude. PK, what is good?
Hey, PK.
Jamie Lynn is here.
Hey, Jamie.
Just tuning in. Are we talking about tarot cards? We were briefly, But we're going to be talking about the Hells Angels today.
Motorcycle gangs.
Vroom, vroom.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about the Hells Angels and the straight Satans, excuse me, and their role in the 1960s counterculture movement and all of that, because I feel like they kind of, when you think about the 60s, a lot of people tend to talk about the music scene, Laurel Canyon. Hells Angels kind of come up a little bit.
Yeah.
But they were really integrated with a lot of people. A lot of influential people.
Yeah.
And I think that their role is kind of maybe, I don't know, it's like lesser known. But they definitely had their place, and they definitely had a role with all this stuff. So we're going to dive into that.
Yeah, it's a really awesome part of the era.
What's up, Ben? Nice to see you, man.
Hail, Ben. Hey, I've been loving all the mead stuff that you're posting, by the way. And you're totally inspiring me because I'm going to add fruit to my, when I do my second ferment this year for my blackberry mead, I'm going to try adding the fruit to the second ferment.
There you go.
So anyway, you're teaching me things as always, so appreciate it.
Dude, and your guys' Vapor Soothe has really come in handy.
Oh my God, it's freaking awesome. Please tell Christy.
Yeah, so I really needed it over the last month and a half. And then it helped my dad, too.
It did. It helped Mario's dad with his ear. And then I was putting it on my ear. That stuff is awesome. So if anybody wants a safe, natural, Vicks Vapor Rub, dude, hook it up with Ben and Christy because she makes this wonderful Vapor Soothe that is so, so nice.
Totally. So it's awesome, dude. We've been singing your praises over here.
Yeah.
Cool. Right on. Michelle says she liked the podcast about Set as well.
Sweet.
That's awesome. Motorcycle gang sounds dirty and dangerous. Yeah, dude, for sure. Bird Dog, what's good, dude? Right on.
Hey, Bird Dog.
Oh, much appreciated. I'm actually going to be with Longo again on, I believe it's next Thursday. So we'll talk about that at the end of the episode with what's going on next Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a good opportunity, and I have a great time talking to him. So I always feel a little bit of a buzz afterwards. And to be able to get some of this stuff off my chest has been a good time. So next week, we'll be doing it again. So she's saying here that they have Hells Angels in Australia, too.
Yes. They're all over the world.
Yeah, they're all over the place. And, it's really interesting, too, because we've watched a handful of videos about the Hells Angels just prepping for the show, and we were supposed to do it last week. So we've had an abundance of time to really think about, what's going on with all of that. And one of the things I'll say before we dive into it too much is that the Hells Angels, I say Hells Angels, it's almost like, for some reason, a music analogy comes to mind. It's almost like saying rock. Or it's almost like saying hip hop, where it's just there's so many different styles of rock. There's so many different styles of hip hop. There's so many different eras of rock, and there's different eras of hip hop that when I say Hells Angels, someone might think of the Hells Angels from the 40s or 50s. Someone might think of it from the 60s, like what we're going to talk about today. Other people think of it like today and what's going on today with it. But there are so many different eras to the Hells Angels. And there's so many different chapters, and there's so many different storylines that we're kind of really narrowing our focus with their influence on this one particular decade, particularly because we're interested in the culture creation aspect of the 1960s. Right. And so some of the videos we saw last night, you can tell that what they're talking about is the modern Hells Angels. So I would assume that, we watched a video with 20 rules that Hells Angels have to live by, and
20 brutal rules.
Right.
It's all brutal.
Yeah. And so to me, it's just were those rules intact in the 60s? Even when you look at footage of the Angels from the 60s to the 80s to the 90s to the present day, there's an obvious evolution, right? They look different. What I kind of picked up is it seemed like a lot of the bikers from the 60s, they had a little bit almost they almost had their own flair or their own personality. Even some of the bikers from like the 70s and stuff, same thing. But it seems like nowadays, you know, if you look at a photo or video of like a group of Hell's Angels today, depending on where they're at in the world, they kind of look very similar. You know, it almost is more like a uniform now,
right?
Where it seems like back in the day, people really embraced having their own sort of identity within the group or whatever. And so I just think that so much has changed since they first began that if you were to read a modern book about the Angels, I don't know how much of it necessarily is going to translate to the Angels that we're talking about in the 60s. And vice versa.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because, like, as an example, I guess we could just kind of ease into everything now. But I read Hell's Angels by Hunter S. Thompson, like many years ago. And so he talks about several stories of the Angels cruising through California, going to some of these small towns in the foothills and stuff like that, and literally taking over the town, pretty much. And like pretty much having a little war or battle with the local sheriff and stuff, and like the police and everything else. And so they were such a force, and there were so many of them that, and they were formidable, like fighters, you know, and kind of warriors in their own way. I would say they knew how to throw down. They weren't afraid to get into a fight. They weren't afraid to stab people. They were used to fighting. They fought each other. A lot of these guys are, you know, from the military and from the Air Force. And that's part of the history. If people don't know, the Hells Angels, like my basic understanding is that a lot of them were Air Force guys in the late 40s. So the year that most people tend to associate with their founding is 1947 or 1948, somewhere around there. And so even look at like the iconography of like the you know, their emblem, their logo, it would fit right on a you know, on an airplane or something like that. And so if I'm not mistaken too, I actually think the Hells Angels name may have come from like an Air Force unit of some kind.
That makes sense.
And so these guys were trained military people, and so it would make sense that they would know how to use a gun and use a knife and use their fists and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But Hunter S. Thompson, when he was following them around, he was saying that they've taken over, you know, small towns, and it ended up becoming like a huge thing. You know, they weren't welcome in a lot of places, obviously. And they brought trouble with them, and they brought all sorts of stuff that would freak out the squares.
Right, which is one of the things that they liked doing.
Oh, yeah, and they would do like anything to be able to do that.
Right.
So I know one of the things that we talked about is that they would even, apparently it was part of their sort of subculture even to have like gay sort of, I don't know if they were having complete like full-blown gay sex with each other or whatever, but they would like make out with each other.
Yeah, there's photos of it.
Right.
Yeah, where there's like a group of bikers and the two of them are in the back like tonguing, you know. Like
big burly biker guys.
Right, where you're like, "Oh, okay." And so it literally was to kind of like cause debauchery, cause people to freak out, cause them to, you know, turn and look and everything else. And they did that too. I mean, just the nature of them being on motorcycles, particularly Harley Davidsons, which have, I mean, a very iconic sound. You know, Harleys sound different than other bikes, just like, you know, another bike sounds like a different bike.
Well,
you know?
that's another thing. There's so many tangents here.
I know.
It's going to be interesting to see just kind of like how we organize our thoughts here, because there's a lot of different things we could talk about. But one of the angles that I think is really interesting is that one of the rules that apparently they have had for a long time is that you have to have a Harley.
Yes, that is in the Hells Angels. That is their thing. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, so we're talking about Hells Angels, and we'll make it known when we start talking about other groups or whatever.
Right.
But the Angels, you had to have a Harley. I think that's really interesting. And then I want to know if Harley acknowledges the Angels at all, because isn't there like a Harley museum in Milwaukee?
Yes, there is.
Right.
Yeah.
I would have to imagine that they would.
I bet they do. I bet they do. Because even I think about even like if you research Harley, And even being from Milwaukee, you know, Harley is a big thing. And so old photos of Harleys and stuff, even the types of people riding them in photos look like they would be these kind of like ex-military, ex-Air Force type people. So I wonder if even like, I don't remember what the origin of Harley is, but it'd be interesting to trace back. When was Harley originated, and then when were the Hells Angels originated, and how did that crossover actually happen?
Right.
You know?
Yeah, what are the origins of everything?
Yeah, right.
Right. Totally. So, so the Hells Angels, late 40s, but in the 60s, well, I know too in the 50s, there was like motorcycle movies, motorcycle gang movies, and
James
things
Dean.
like that. James Dean.
Yeah.
Totally. Kenneth Anger made some stuff related to motorcycle culture. And so he made a movie called Scorpio Rising, which we kind of checked out parts of it last night. Mm-hmm. It didn't occur to me that I had actually never seen it. But for those of you guys who don't know, Kenneth Anger is like an occult filmmaker. And so he's been around. He was making stuff in like the 40s. But in the 60s, he actually made a motorcycle short film, and it really explored the homoerotic aspect of everything. And so it's really funny that like there is this thing about the guy who dresses up like a motorcycle guy, wearing leather and the little hat thing, and you know, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's like an image that's been put out there, just like the Village People, right?
That's the first thing I think of. Yeah.
You know, there's a motorcycle guy in the Village People.
Yeah.
You know, why is that a thing? How did the motorcycle look turn into something like that, or be connected with something like that?
Right. Yeah.
So anyways, that's interesting. But the Angels though, so the main thing is that why we want to talk about it is because it seems as though with the culture creation aspect of the 60s that they were curiously in a lot of places and rubbed elbows with some people that were absolutely part of this wave of like propaganda and were part of psyop type things and whatever. And so they were very friendly with like Jerry Garcia.
Yeah, and the Grateful Dead.
Ken Kesey, Allen Ginsberg. I read somewhere, and I didn't do follow-up research, but that they were friendly with the Beatles and the Stones as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely the Stones for sure.
Right.
I'm not surprised with the Beatles.
And then the Merry Pranksters, too.
Yeah. And then Jefferson Airplane, Big Brother and the Holding Company, which those who don't know, Big Brother and the Holding Company was basically Janis Joplin's first band that she was in. Mm-hmm. And if you are into Big Brother and the Holding Company, their first album, Cheap Thrills, look it up online, or maybe you already have it or you've seen it, but it is, it's basically like a comic by R. Crumb. Mm-hmm. It's a really cool album cover, but at the bottom right-hand corner, there's like a Hells Angels seal of approval. And it just says, approved by Hells Angels, San Francisco. And so I know that the Hells Angels were a part of the culture with those bands too. So big time in San Francisco in the Bay Area was where a lot of actually these biker gangs originated. Or they were very close to there, or that was kind of like
lots of West Coast activity.
Their headquarters. Yeah, definitely.
Right. And R. Crumb, he's a Bay Area guy.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And he was very famous during that time too. But I highly recommend, if you've never seen that album cover, it's really cool. It's one of my favorite album covers and one of my favorite albums of that time, to be honest. But
Right.
Yeah.
So is there an angle that you want to start with here? I have one, if you don't have an idea of where to begin.
If you have one, let's go for it.
Just because we're already talking about the Bay Area and who they were rubbing elbows with and all that kind of stuff. The Altamont concert.
Yeah.
And just kind of what happened there. That's one of the more notorious things that they've kind of been known for.
Yeah, a lot of people know about that one. So might as well just get it out in the front.
Right. So was it called the Altamont Free Concert or something?
Well,
or
yeah.
Free Festival?
They wanted it to be a free concert.
Uh-huh.
So the Rolling Stones wanted it to be a free concert because they knew that, like, in the past, other bands had done free concerts. And so it wasn't just the Rolling Stones that were a part of it, but it was Jefferson Airplane, Santana, the Flying Burrito Brothers, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, the Rolling Stones, and the Grateful Dead were also scheduled to play. But after, they were supposed to go on after the Rolling Stones, and, you know, the stabbing happened and all that stuff, so they pulled out.
Right.
And I've got some interesting quotes from Jerry Garcia from that whole thing that we can get into. But yeah, Altamont, it was outside of San Francisco, and it was at the Altamont Raceway.
Right.
Which is I can't remember the name of the city. It might be Tracy, California. I saw, but yeah, that's like not far out of Frisco.
Do you remember the year?
1969.
Right.
December 6th, 1969 was when that concert went down. So we're post Manson murders. You know, we're post Woodstock at this point. You know, in December.
Right.
Of 69, because
so the tail end of the decade.
Tail end of the year. So yeah, murders happened in early August 8th and 9th to be exact, and then Woodstock was that following weekend in 69.
Right, totally. And so I don't know whose bright idea it was. Maybe it was something that kind of came from a higher source or something like that, but the Angels were there to be security.
Right.
Which is really interesting, and it's like the more research we've done, and actually Jake Loco, shout out Jake, he posted something on his channel, and I mean, this is way more modern, but it's really interesting that apparently after the Sandy Hook situation, we'll call it, the Angels were either volunteered or they were asked to be security in Sandy Hook.
What?
Yes. To basically keep the Westboro Baptist Church in check. You know who they are?
I mean, I know the name, but
they always protest like military funerals and like gay funerals and stuff like that. They're like a hardcore right-wing conservative sort of church, but they always hold signs up that it's like God hates gays and stuff like that.
Okay.
And so they're pretty extreme with their stuff. So the Hells Angels showed up to be security so that these people could not protest against or get their propaganda out there.
Interesting.
Or whatever. So we found out that the Hells Angels, I mean, we'll get into this at some point, but the security sort of thing, I feel like they were almost kind of like a paramilitary private sort of security firm sort of thing. And I think they probably did this for some really, really shady people and for some really, really, I don't know, whatever you want to say, they probably assisted in like trafficking of all sorts.
Oh, yes.
And I think that they not only were trafficking things themselves, but I think that maybe they were more like security detail of like ensuring that certain things got to where they needed to go, ensuring that things kind of went smoothly or whatever. They just remind me of kind of like this like muscle for hire. And you said it last night, but dirty work.
Yeah.
You know, that it seemed like that was probably their game, was doing a lot of dirty work. And when you look into anything about the Hells Angels, it's very secretive, and they can't really, apparently still, which I think is kind of incredible, they can't even have cell phones.
Right, and they're not supposed to like post stuff on social media or on the internet. And then it made me think too, it's like, yeah, well, you don't typically see like Instagram accounts for like Hells Angels. You're not going to see that shit, you know? And then one of the things, well, what I kind of think too is that, so they were like they're like hired security for people who are trafficking, who are doing,
that's what it seems like,
this kind of stuff. So I do think that they're connected to the mafia, and I think that they are mafia in their own right. I think that they're connected to the CIA and the cops, and it's all in cahoots. And I think that that's the other reason why they were such major players in the 60s, because we now know that all of the organizations I just listed off were all in cahoots in big ways because they had such a huge operation happening during that decade.
Oh, and it makes so much sense. It would be perfect to have guys like this at your disposal.
Oh my God.
Because they and we'll get into the symbolism or whatever, but
and they're down to party. And that's what the 60s was about. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So they're down on all levels. They're down and down and dirty. So it was just like, it makes sense to me that they were hooked up with all the things that they were.
Right. So what happened at Altamont?
Well, the story is that, and what we watched, you can see the footage on, but in a nutshell, the Hells Angels were the hired security. The Hells Angels were kind of like, baiting the crowd a lot, it seemed. But the ultimate thing that kind of like shut the concert down is the fact that there was a guy, and he was a black dude, and he's actually dressed really nice. So it's interesting.
This is during the Rolling Stones
performance. Now I don't remember 100% if it's that he's singing the song Sympathy for the Devil. That could be part. I know that that's part of the whole story.
It's kind of like the lore.
That's the lore of it, but they do have a song called Sympathy for the Devil. So it could have been during that song, I'm not sure. But so before the stabbing happened though, like the Rolling Stones kind of like stopped the show a little bit because like bands were noticing that there was like a lot of beatings happening, lots of stuff. The airplane, Jefferson Airplane, also stopped their set at one point. If you watch, you can find that footage online where like I think it's the one of the dudes, the lead singer, Krasner. I can't remember his first name. Anyway, he kind of gets in a scuffle with them, and Grace Slick like is asking everyone to calm down and blah blah blah. And so that happened before the Stones. But while the Stones are playing, this guy, I don't remember his name, the black guy, well dressed, he pulls out a gun. Apparently that's the story, that he pulled out a gun and the Hells Angels saw it, and the dude came over and he stabbed him. And that's the story.
A couple times.
You
can see it pretty clearly in the footage.
You can when you stop it and stuff, and we stopped it and watched it a couple times, but like you see him raise the knife and you see him come down on the dude and he stabs him a couple times, and then the guy dies there at the venue. And they have him on a stretcher and everything like that. So that's like the ultimate thing that happened there that everybody knows about.
And some people like to say that it was ritualistic in nature.
Yeah.
Because of sympathy for the devil.
Right.
Because of all this stuff. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so watching the footage, though, it looks more chaotic than that.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't doubt that like this concert could have been organized for some reason, or it could have been known that it was going to be whatever. Right. I don't know. But from what I'm getting is that the Hells Angels were just such a staple, and that so many of these famous bands always had them around them, that it wasn't out of the norm that they were there.
No,
it wasn't out of the norm that they were hired security. So a lot of times on normie research side of things, when you look into this, people go, oh, well, whose idea was it to hire the Angels for security? It's like, dude, that was like seemingly commonplace that they were just around. And particularly with the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead always had the Angels around. They were backstage, they were at the shows, and then here we have Grateful Dead, who are supposed to be these hippy-dippy, peace, love, and light kind of band thing. And they're like really hooked up with the Angels. Jerry Garcia was playing like their private parties and shit, And
what I learned too is that Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead, that they helped fund a documentary about the Angels, which I think is what we saw the other night or last night.
Okay, the one that they made.
Hells Angels Forever.
Yeah,
I could be wrong on that, but the Grateful Dead helped financially support a documentary. And then also, I'll say this is a really, really interesting tidbit that I'm just like, wow, what are the odds? George Lucas, the guy behind Star Wars, he was actually at the Altamont concert. As a filmmaker, he was helping film the whole entire event, right? And he's a Bay Area guy. And so that makes sense. So I guess he was a student filmmaker. He was there filming the event. And what they say is that his footage did not actually get developed for some reason.
Interesting.
That there was a technical issue with how he loaded the film, or it got exposed to light or something like that. But that there was some kerfuffle with his footage. And so his footage from that show, or maybe just the stabbing or whatever, has not seen the light of day. Which to me is kind of interesting too. It's just like, okay. Is that accurate or not? Right. Or was the footage too good? Right. Or whatever. Was he too close to the whole entire scene? But just the fact that George Lucas was there, I think is kind of fascinating.
Right.
So that's just another little side weave.
Well, one of the things that's coming to me as we're talking about like the bands who are connected with the Hells Angels and stuff, and the Grateful Dead being one. Mm-hmm. And we all know, and we've talked about this already in our LSD episode, but the Grateful Dead was known as like the acid test band. And so they were distributing acid a lot. And so as we're talking about it, it's like, yeah, well, if the Hells Angels are like security for the people who are supplying drugs, who are trafficking drugs, who are doing whatever, well, they're going to be around a band that's known for giving out lots of drugs. And everybody knows mostly that the 60s was about drugs in a lot of ways, LSD in particular, but there were all sorts of drugs swirling around because mescaline was like a brand new, like a kind of a newer drug at the time. And that's one of the drugs that like was circulated a lot with the Manson crew and the Hells Angels and the Straight Satans and stuff like that. But it just makes me think about that. So the bands that they were heavily connected with probably had a lot to do with distributing drugs.
Right.
Is my hunch, is what I'm thinking.
Totally. Oh, yeah, definitely. I would imagine so. But one of the artists, just real quick, that we saw in that documentary, because we saw a documentary called Hells Angels Forever, and it followed some Hells Angels in the early 80s.
Right.
So it's a bit after the fact, but apparently some of these members were around in the 60s. But if I'm not mistaken, they interviewed one of the musicians who was playing one of their private parties, which they called the Hells Angels, Hells Angels Ball. Is that what they called it?
Well, they had the Pirate Cruise.
The Pirate Cruise. The Pirates Ball.
Pirates Ball. Where they're on a ship. They literally are on a ship, and that's their thing. And it's just a Hells Angels exclusive party. But
one of the musicians said something along the lines of like, I'm going to paraphrase, but kind of like, you don't say no to the Angels. Something along those lines.
Right.
Of just being like, oh, yeah, well, like they're people you want to be in good with. You don't want to be at odds with them. So it was almost kind of one of those things where I bet it was hard for a lot of people to say no to their advances of whatever it is they wanted from them.
That's a good point. And Jerry Garcia has said something very similar to that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you kind of just stay out of their way. They're around. If you don't piss them off, they're fine.
Right.
So it's kind of like, don't poke the bear and you'll be good kind of thing. Mentality is what it seemed like. So it seems like a lot of these people, even though they're around, like people had to walk on eggshells, to just make sure that things were good. Cool or whatever.
Right. Right. So what were you going to say?
Well, I wanted to read just a quote or two from Jerry Garcia, because from Altamont. So, okay. So the stabbing happens with the Rolling Stones, and the Grateful Dead was supposed to play after the Rolling Stones. So at that time, like, the bands were usually helicoptered in, so Jerry Garcia was talking about how, they got off the helicopter. So here we go. This is Jerry Garcia. Phil and I got off the helicopter and came down through the crowd. It was like Dante's Inferno. It was spreading out in concentric waves. It was weird. It was weird. It wasn't just the angels. There were weird kinds of psychic violence happening around the edges that didn't have to do with the blows.
Wow.
So I read that quote and I was like, interesting. Okay. So to me, when I read that quote, it reminds me of all of these other concerts you hear about where it's like, what's that one that...
Travis Scott?
Yeah, the Travis Scott stuff, where it's like, wait a second. Okay, so people that were there were, say, okay, like we couldn't leave. It was like this thing, and we were like trapped there. And then the sounds that were happening were actually like stifling people enough where they were passing out and stuff. And so for him to kind of like pick up on the vibe and be like, wait, there's like more going on here than just the Hells Angels are being violent. It's like there's some other force.
Maybe that's where a lot of people's ritual angle comes from.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. So it's like, I don't doubt that it was a ritual. I don't doubt that it was orchestrated or there was looshing happening or, what have you. But I thought that quote was really telling as to how he was probably genuinely feeling when he was there. And anyone who has sensitivities to that kind of stuff, when you feel that kind of stuff, you feel it and
And he's played so many shows.
Right, and he's part of it and he's into it and whatever. So it's like you can't deny someone when they have those feelings. And when you have that feeling, you can probably bet that there is then something happening. I mean, obviously there's people that go off the rails with that kind of stuff and then everything is just whatever. But, I thought that was pretty telling.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I heard that quote before.
Yeah, I actually just found it in my research when I was kind of doing more research today. Found a pretty good article of just like, more in-depth stuff about Altamont and what was going on.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense that they would have been hooked up with all sorts of people. And that's kind of one of my main questions is like, what is the relationship? Is there a relationship between, like, I don't know, Freemasonry and the Hells Angels? Well, is there any crossover? Have any Freemasons been Hells Angels? Obviously everybody knows that the military and its various, factions or branches of it or whatever, definitely hooked up with Freemasonry, definitely hooked up with different lodge systems and stuff like that. And so is there any sort of like occult angle with what they were up to? I'm just speculating and just kind of asking questions here. So I don't have any concrete information about that, but maybe too, I could totally see them not necessarily being interested in that kind of stuff, but working for people who are very steeped in those types of things. Right. For sure. Right. Like I could see that pretty easily, actually.
Well, and we kind of, you brought this up last night because watching that documentary, even the language they use is very similar to Freemasonic language of. They're talking about the brotherhood, and there's a clear hierarchy that is in the motorcycle club. Right. And we were talking about how, like, you have like the leaders of the clubs or whatever, and the guys who've been in the clubs for decades or whatever, they're more like the 33rd degree Mason kind of thing, and obviously, like Mario said, we're just speculating here. But to me, the way that it's set up, the hierarchical like aspect of the group is also very military like.
Right. Oh yeah.
And like they ride in formations. They have very strategic things about how they ride, who rides where. The leaders of the pack are up front, and then they have like prospects who are just like, trying to get into the group. They're all in the back. Mm-hmm. There's certain formations that they take depending on what's going on. They're talking about how if one of them gets pulled over, the whole crew stops. The whole crew gets just goes over to the side of the road. They don't just keep going and then leave one of their members, with the cop or whatever. They all pull over.
Right.
So it's very much like a very strategic sort of thing that they have going on.
So speaking of Freemasonry and stuff too, I think another appropriate analogy here is the fact that, there's a lot of Freemasons who literally are in it for the fellowship.
Yes.
They're in it for community oriented reasons. They don't really know that much about a lot of Freemasonic, symbolism or anything like that, like the higher teachings of the Freemasonic tradition. So if you were to ask them questions about, well, what do you think about this or that or whatever, I would imagine that some of these people are pretty oblivious, but they're in it for the brotherhood. And so in Freemasonry, there's all sorts of different lodges. And there's lodges all over the world, just like with the Hells Angels, well, especially now. So there's certain lodges that are really steeped into the like occult magical aspect of it. There's other lodges that are way more focused on this angle or that angle. I'm sure there's lodges that are very, very connected to some seedy things, you know. And I would imagine that the Hells Angels, it might be a similar sort of thing where, you know, I don't think you can say, especially nowadays, 100%, but I don't think you could say that all of them are trafficking or help traffickers or whatever. You know, that it sounds to me, especially now, a lot of these guys, they're just really into motorcycles, and it's really it's become a brand now. And I thought it was really interesting to learn that actually a lot of lawsuits that the Hells Angels have fought, they've won, because people like Disney or some whatever network channel or something like that, they will try and use the Hells Angels like iconography and their emblem and stuff, and they're not having it. So they have a long history of protecting their brand. And they have everything now. So you can buy Hells Angels anything, really. Coffee mugs and just whatever you want.
Right.
Keychains and stuff like that. So that's what I want. I want a keychain.
I'll get you a keychain.
Thank you. So anyway, so just saying that it's very different from what it used to be. But there still might be some chapters that are hardcore doing some stuff like that. But I think a lot of them are probably more normie nowadays.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. You know, one of the other things too that I think is important to talk about is that so during this time, but particularly like in the 40s, 50s, that's when like a lot of these gangs, these biker gangs started.
Yeah.
So the Hells Angels is among them. We have the Straight Satans, which is another group that was formed a little later in 1959. You also have the Satan Slaves, which is another one. But what I found was interesting about the Straight Satans, and the reason that I think this one is interesting is because the Straight Satans are who was more associated with Manson and the family.
Right.
They're the ones, they were, no doubt they were hanging out with the Hells Angels as well, but the Straight Satans were kind of more like Manson's crew.
Like his people.
His people. And so the Straight Satans were formed, like I said, in 1959. They were formed in Santa Monica by this guy named William Robert Jacobs, and he was known as Father Bill. And then what I thought was also interesting is that there's a woman, her name is Marilyn Ruth Foster. She used to be known as Mama Ruth, and she helped Father Bill like organize the Straight Satans. And together they kind of like really they made the Straight Satans kind of like a solid group. Now this lady, Mother Ruth, she was one of the only, if not the only female that was allowed to become a member of the Hells Angels. She also later became a member of the Satan Slaves. She was also a member of the Straight Satans. So whoever this woman is, which I'm planning on doing more of a deep dive on her, I wasn't able to find as much as I thought I could on her. But it's very interesting to me because one of the things with these motorcycle clubs is that they are pretty strict about women not being members of the club.
Dude, yeah. So much
it's
of this stuff.
It's very strange.
Again, it reminds me of Freemasonry.
Yeah.
Because in Freemasonry, too, it's not uncommon. Like, Crowley was part of, like, multiple Freemasonic lodges and multiple lodge systems and mystery schools and stuff. It's like some people, when they start, they, like, are way into it. So they become a Rosicrucian, they become a Freemason, they become this and that and whatever else. And so that's interesting. I was going to ask that. Can people join multiple clubs or whatever?
Apparently this woman could.
Also, these same thing where, at least in Freemasonry, you have Order of the Eastern Star.
Right.
Right. And so technically, I don't know how people look at it, but in my mind, it's like technically you're not a Freemason, but they have like a lady version. You know, I don't know how big it is and whatever, but they have their own symbolism and stuff, but it's under the umbrella of Freemasonry. So, but the same sort of thing where it's just like it's a boys' club.
Yeah, these clubs there are all women motorcycle clubs.
Right.
but I just find it interesting that this woman, for some reason, was allowed. She had patches, which is another thing. Anybody who has followed anything about motorcycle culture, the patches are a huge deal. You don't just get they don't just give patches to anyone.
No.
You have to, when you're being a prospect, which means you're basically like a grunt, you're just on the entry level. You only get you get patch by patch kind of thing. You don't get your full garb yet until you're fully integrated into the club.
And if they don't, they take that really seriously.
They do. And
it's just like having tattoos in prison.
Yeah.
It's just like if you have a tattoo, they'll ask you about it, or they're going to assume whatever your tattoo represents that you're about that life, and they're going to check you on that.
Totally.
And if you're just a poser or whatever, it's like it's not good for you.
Right. And it reminds me also, this is very military-esque, because the military is like that too, with the patches.
That's true too, yeah.
And, you have your badge, you get your Purple Heart, you get there's so many patches. The Purple Heart is just a very common.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if that's a patch necessarily.
It's a medal.
It's a medal. So
I know what you mean.
Excuse me, no disrespect. But I just know that there are a lot of patches out there for military stuff in the same way. And then for anybody who isn't sure what the 1%er thing is, because there's a difference between a 1%er motorcycle club versus just a motorcycle club.
Right.
And so the 1%er thing is basically the concept that 99% of motorcycle riders are law-abiding citizens. They are cool. They're whatever with that kind of stuff. They're going to follow the rules. And then that 1%, they're the outlaws. They're the ones that are willing to break the laws or go above and beyond to do whatever to not follow rules. And so that's the difference. So when you see the 1%er patch on somebody's jacket, it is indicating that they are the outlaws.
Which to me, it's like, hey, I'm a criminal. Here's a symbol.
Yeah, I'm waving my criminal flag or whatever.
It doesn't, yeah.
Well, to me, that's another reason why, or to me, where it's so obvious that these guys are in cahoots with people that they're above the law.
Yeah,
in some way.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree.
So that to me, the 1%er thing is literally just a signal that they're, whatever.
Well, okay, so there's so one of the things that we saw in the documentary about the different rules, and again, I don't know when these rules that we came across, when they were established. I have a feeling that a lot of it was developed post 60s, but I could be wrong. Maybe some of these core rules have always been there. As an example, one of the things they said was that apparently one of the modern rules is that they allow drinking and smoking weed, but nothing else.
Oh, right.
And it's we saw footage of them snorting coke and this and that.
Oh, yeah.
And we know that back in the day, they were really partying for real.
Yeah.
So to me, it's that obviously wasn't a rule in the 60s. Maybe it is now, but it wasn't back then. And it makes sense too. You're riding, a motorcycle. So it's you don't want your people to be impaired and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're smart. Yeah.
And so a lot of these rules have changed, but one of the rules was that they don't accept cops. And so if you were once a cop, or you started your sort of trajectory to become a cop, it's a no-go. So they're not going to allow you to be in the Hells Angels. So to me, what that says, if that's something that has been around for a while, and seemingly they've had many, many encounters with cops, plenty of angels have been arrested, plenty of angels have fought cops and all that kind of stuff, right? To me, what it says is if there is something going on here where they're in cahoots, it would make a lot of sense that even the cops would want, almost just like gangs. So it's just the way the situation is set up with drugs are illegal. So we're going to have gangs deal drugs. We're going to disseminate crack all over the country, and we're going to have these little hoodlums and stuff deal the drugs in their own neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to cause street warfare shit to happen, COINTELPRO type stuff. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to create a division between the Crips and the Bloods and this and that. They live in the same town, but we're going to have them warring against each other and killing each other over drug money that we're supplying them the drugs, right? So we're actually we're putting it out there. We're proliferating all of these drugs throughout all of these ghettos and stuff like that. So the war on drugs, they make it seem like it's a war against these gangs. How long have we heard this for? Right? Oh, gang warfare. It's at an all-time high. We got to do something to stop these gangs. Say no to drugs. Dare. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All of this type of shit.
McGruff, the crime dog.
Yeah, exactly. And so say no to drugs, right? But in actuality, the groups dealing are just the lowest level. They're at the lowest tier of this hierarchy that makes it so that these drugs are getting out there and that people are getting hooked and that money is being made or whatever. So having these low-level gangsters or these low-level thugs, they're part of the system. They may or may not think so, you know, but they're still part of the system of this organized crime sort of unit or whatever. And so it benefits the cops. It benefits, you know, these higher ups or whatever you want to say. It benefits the higher echelons of the hierarchy to have people, to have boots on the ground, if you will, doing their dirty work.
Oh, yes.
And so it would make sense that you would have a unit like the Hells Angels or some of these other motorcycle clubs out there doing your dirty work, basically. And so it just, to me, it's just one of these things where it benefits your whole entire organization. It benefits the bottom line to have people out there, groups out there like that. Even though they're rough and dirty and this and that, whatever, it's like, exactly. You can use that to your benefit. Yeah, they're intimidating. Yeah, they do lots of illegal shit. It's just like, that's just how the world works. So that's how the world of drugs operates, basically.
Right.
You know, so even though you're just a little street dealer sort of guy or whatever, it's just like, you're still part of this whole entire pyramid. You know, and so I kind of look at the Hells Angels as being like, no, we want them to be separate from cops in a way. We want them to kind of have this wild lifestyle because it's going to benefit us in so many different ways. You know, that's the niche. That's their niche. That's their role. They're going to be able to do things that the cops can't do. Right?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
They're going to be able to do things that the sheriff can't do. You know, the other thing I think that they were probably doing would be my guess would be that they were just literally the muscle for hire, intimidation for hire, probably to collect debts and shit like that.
Oh, definitely.
So you know, so I could see like bookies and things like that. You know, I could see the mob using these guys for all sorts of different reasons. That's not necessarily them actually trafficking the drugs themselves, although I don't see why not.
Right.
But they're just on motorcycles too, you know, so you can only carry so much, I guess. But between all of them, I'm sure you can carry a hell of a lot. And I'm sure they have their tactics and everything else. But I could see them being more of this security intimidation sort of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, being informants as well, you know, and I think we should check the chat, but then maybe get into more of the Manson connection.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because that goes along with kind of more of like informant kind of stuff. Who's watching what, who's watching who, who's tattling, you know.
Wow, we're already at an hour. That's crazy. I feel like we just started.
Yeah, I know. This one is great. There's a lot to talk about with this subject.
All right, let's see who's here. Oh, yeah. So Jamie Lynn earlier on said, did y'all see that Leslie Van Houten was just released from prison?
Yes.
Michelle did bring that up the other day.
Yes. I did see that. And a very interesting turn of events, I would say, for sure.
Let's see here. Yeah, exactly. We're going to talk about that, Adrian. Charles Manson was involved with the Hells Angels that were connected to the CIA, for sure. So we're going to dive into that shortly. What's up, Thunder Chicken? Mr. Lee.
Howdy, Lee.
What's up, Pedro?
Pedro.
He's listening while he's driving.
Nice.
Be safe, dude.
Oh, what's up, Stephanie? Nice to see you if you're still here.
Hey, Stephanie. Thanks for hanging around. All right, let's see. Okay, so Pedro, look at this. It's a long, juicy one by Pedro standards. So let's see what's going on here. I studied marketing in college. One marketing professor I had worked for, Harley. I had worked for Harley and rode with Hell's Angels and had some weird tied-in relationship with him. I didn't understand it at the time. Still don't. Okay, gotcha.
Ah, interesting.
Totally. I can only imagine some of the stories that some of these former members have with what they were up to. Bird Dog says, Sounds like violent hippies. Exactly right, dude.
Yep.
It made me think of I thought of like Black Bloc and Antifa a couple times.
Yes, we talked about that last night.
So it's just like the violent liberal. And freaking Weather Underground shit.
Very
and just
much
kind of
so.
like militarized leftism, I guess.
Yep.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
You know, but it's really interesting too. I will say that the Hells Angels, I feel like they're very mercurial. And so, which I say that about everything, but it's so true. They're very mercurial in that on one hand, they were partying and up to no good, which definitely is more, I guess, just like on a pop culture sort of level, definitely gets tied more to, the left.
Yeah.
Smoking weed, drinking, partying, burning out, all that kind of stuff. Yet, they also have they're like a lot of them were like straight up, I don't even know what the right word is. Like they were kind of like pseudo Nazis.
Yeah, they were.
And so if you look at enough Hell's Angels documentaries or photos or whatever, you're going to see a lot of angels wearing SS patches and they have death skull stuff and they're swastikas, iron crosses, exactly. And so to me, it's just kind of interesting that they're so extreme on both sides, I think, that it's kind of hard to make heads or tails sometimes of like who their allegiance truly is with. And then also I can kind of see them, which that was really bold, by the way. If you were wearing swastika shit in the 60s, it's still, I mean, I don't have to go down a swastika rabbit hole or whatever. I will one day, though. I have to. But that was pretty hardcore to be wearing that in the 60s.
Oh, yeah.
I would assume it was more hardcore back then, given the proximity to World War II and everything else, than it would be today.
And just race stuff and everything,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Totally. So anyway, that's a good point, dude. Violent hippies, for sure. I think it's in that lineage in some way, shape, or form. So Katriana is saying first Harley was released in 1903.
Okay.
Yeah, that's another good point, Bird Dog. He's just mentioning the fact, or they traded horses for bikes from the bandit days. Total counterculture. Yeah, that's the thing. I think symbolically, the Hells Angels, I mean, when you're riding a motorcycle or a bike, it feels symbolically, it's kind of no different than a horse. It's a motorized horse. It's an iron horse sort of thing.
Right.
And so I put a lot of travel symbolism together. And I think whether you're talking about the horse, the motorcycle, the bike, the chariot, the boat, et cetera, I think a lot of the symbolism is the same. And a lot of it has this independent, especially when you're solo riding, on any of these things. There is this independence and this freedom that's attached with it, and that's what the motorcycle has been connected with for a long time, which makes a ton of sense too.
Yeah.
So a lot of the movies that are about this, it's like you're an outlaw, you're a rebel, you're an original, you are independent.
You're an easy rider.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Easy rider, for sure. So there's all of that. Pedro just says, my hunch now is all centered around culture creation agents.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah, for sure. Compromised. Yeah, Sturgis is still a thing, Birdog. I don't know much about it, but my understanding is it's definitely still a thing. Cool. So a lot of people just agreeing with us. Dirty work for sure. They're goons. Yeah, totally. The branch is saying, I've noticed that military oaths and government oaths sound a lot like Masonic rites.
Yeah. That makes sense.
100%. Hey, my Sherry. Nice to see you.
Hey, what's up?
Cool. So you want to get into the Charles Manson side of things?
Yeah, let's do it because, that's part of the Summer of Love. And also,
oh, yeah.
These biker gangs played a pretty big role with the family and Manson. And I think it goes back to kind of what we were talking about and what you brought up last night of it being like they're kind of like hired They're hired security. They're hired to
do different things that other groups probably wouldn't be able to get away with.
Yeah, and they're not and wouldn't be willing to do, right? And so with Manson, they were trafficking all sorts of stuff. Drugs, women, they were into prostitution, they were stealing cars.
I would say also, women, and then just to include also probably underage people.
Yeah, so definitely probably underage people. They were also really big into making dune buggies and all these different things. So car parts were very valuable to them. Typically, not all motorcycle riders, but a lot of the ones that are really into it and serious, typically those people are mechanically inclined enough that they can work on their own bikes. Mm-hmm. So they'd be very valuable asset to Manson in that regard too, because they were building dune buggies and these vehicles and stuff like that. But I think one of the biggest things to me...
Maybe talk about briefly, why were they building dune buggies and stuff?
Well, because they were going into the desert, but into areas that were really, really rough. In particular, it's like Goler's Gulch. Gosh, I should know that name. But they also were like going into Death Valley and stuff. But there is a gulch that they used to go to all the time, and it's written in many books about how challenging it was to get to the actual area that they had to go to. Mm-hmm. Like huge boulders, huge inclines, and these dune buggies were equipped to be able to get to these places. But then they were also using them as a means to intimidate people too, because it's like this big burly dune buggy coming down the desert road or whatever.
But there was a long-term agenda for being out in the desert. Oh, that's what I'm getting to.
Oh, okay. So yeah, Manson feeling as though there was going to be some sort of race war that was going to begin, and that him and his family and his crew were going to go down underneath the ground and live in what he would refer to as the bottomless pit while this race war took place. And then they would emerge from the desert, and then they would procreate after the race war happened and society was decimated or whatever. And they would be some of the only survivors, so they would be able to procreate and make the new race.
So he thought that he was prophetic in some way.
Yes.
Or he thought he had inside information.
And this is the story.
Right, exactly. So it could be how accurate is it, right?
Right. We don't know how much of it is true, how much of it is, fabricated or whatever, but that was part of the dune buggy thing.
Right. And to me, one of the really fascinating angles is that he thought that this plan almost was like being spoken to him directly via the White Album.
Yes, from the Beatles.
From the Beatles.
Right.
Right. And so he thought that Helter Skelter, was that the name for the race war, or was that the name for this incident that maybe would set things off or something?
That was part of it. He was convinced that so Helter Skelter was going to be the start of the race war, or that the black people needed to rise up and they needed to create Helter Skelter. And he's quoted as saying, if Blackie doesn't do it soon, I'm going to have to show them how to do it.
Wow, really?
That's a quote. But then there's also people like Neil Sanders who think that the whole race war thing and the Beatles album and all that stuff actually wasn't as big as what the media portrayed it to be.
I could totally see it being just kind of conjured up after the fact.
Right.
And then the rumor mill just kind of running with it or whatever.
But, you can't deny that they used Helter Skelter was written, on the wall in blood. And Arise, which was another thing, because that's from the song Blackbird.
That's true.
So it's you can't deny, though, that
there's some stuff that lines up.
There's linkages. And so I think that it could have maybe been planned from the get-go that they were going to maybe use the White Album as a means with this group, with this PSYOP, whatever it was, that they wanted to connect it to this. So to make it a mainstream story, to make it really sensational or whatever. And so the Revelation number 9 was a huge thing with Manson, apparently, and Manson was quite literate with the Bible as well. So that's like known. And then members, a lot of things that you hear that people would relate him to Jesus Christ, or that he called himself Jesus Christ, or that he had members saying that he was Jesus Christ. A lot of the times you'll hear some of the accounts of the women saying, like, they would say like, oh, and he's Christ, like he's Jesus and whatever. And so there was this whole Son of Man, Manson kind of linkage to him.
Right.
That I think is really interesting. But do you have anything else to add to that side of things?
Totally. I mean, I just think it's interesting. There's like a whole little history of linking serial killers with a particular piece of media. And that I think that there might be some sort of programming angle with this. They linked Charles Manson with the White Album.
Yeah.
Right? And then the guy who killed John Lennon is linked with Catcher in the Rye.
Right.
And that's true. I think literally this guy had supposedly, the story goes is that he somehow was inspired, if I'm not mistaken, by Catcher in the Rye. And that I think he maybe even had it on him when he killed John Lennon.
Yeah, and he like read it like every day, or it was something crazy like that where he was reading it nonstop or something.
Totally, exactly. So anyway, so to me, it's just one of these things where I'm like, that's kind of curious. And then I just want to say too, I mentioned it like I feel like I mentioned it every episode. We're totally going to do a Beatles episode because their influence on the decade, it just can't be sort of like overlooked. And although they're not necessarily tied with a lot of the West Coast stuff, Laurel Canyon, blah, 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 they were right there in the mix with a lot of things. And there's no way that they were just an organic band that got popular and whatever. They were a construct, they were complete fabrication. And a lot of really good researchers have done a ton of research on this stuff. And it's just like, I don't buy that they were writing their own music. It's pretty much confirmed that I think it's confirmed that they used studio musicians. So when they release an album, that's not Ringo playing the drums. It's not I think they're really singing. I think that was really the boys doing it.
Right.
But I think instrumentation wise it wasn't the Beatles.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And I mean that's documented too publicly and
exactly. And this is how the industry works.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so anyway, so the fact that there is this Beatles Manson crossover thing is interesting. And then the fact that it's related to race wars of all things, which is funny because it's called the White Album too. Right. I just have to say.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one.
And then the other thing too that I just want to mention, I mentioned the fact that the Hells Angels were seen rocking swastikas and SS memorabilia and stuff. And then what do you see on little Charlie's forehead?
Right.
At some point, you see the swastika. And then what do you see on these girls as well? Or like one of them has like their hand up and it's like a carved swastika on her hand and everything else. So it's just really interesting that the swastika is what it is. And anyway, I got to do a swastika presentation at some point because I have a lot of thoughts about that.
No, totally. And to go further too, Manson had associations with like the Aryan Brotherhood in prison. That's supposedly. He also had connections to Scientology in prison as well, which most people who've studied the '60s will know that Scientology was a pretty big thing in the 60s among a lot of these groups. The Process Church of Final Judgment, started and stemmed in Scientology, which Manson has connections to them as well. So they're all there. I think Manson was kind of like a lab rat in a way. I think he was a lab rat that was kind of groomed to be whoever he was. And I noticed somebody saying it in the chat, being given LSD in prison, which I don't doubt that at all, because I don't doubt that he was singled out in some way. There's also accounts, depending on the books you read, of Manson talking about how he was he was forced to or told to wear headphones on certain evenings where there was like transmissions, sent to him. And he was not the only prisoner that talks about that happening. And what better thing? I mean, if the government does what they do, which they say they do, is that they would probably definitely experiment on prisoners because why? I mean, I hate to say it this way, but why wouldn't they? It's these people are being held against their will in many, and they're locked up. They don't have an option to say no. And so Manson, definitely, there's so many accounts of him being messed with in prison, and then the Aryan Brotherhood stuff, which then goes along further with all the other things we're talking about, being connected to the swastika and all the memorabilia and stuff that the Hell's Angels also, would have on and wear.
And I'll say regarding the prison experimental stuff and whatever.
Yeah.
I've heard this from 2 different places. I think I read it once somewhere. I can't remember where. And then I heard it from, I think it was a Soft White Underbelly interview. But at some point, they designed some of these prisons to have a frequency room.
Oh, God.
And that some of these prisons literally have a frequency room where they're just fucking with you the whole entire time. And the guy was saying that literally it like basically drove him nuts.
Ugh, dude, that seriously hurts my soul to hear
and
that.
There's nothing you could do. So you don't need headphones.
Right, where are you going to go?
Yeah,
right, what
exactly.
are you going to do?
And so they could do very targeted, very specific programming to an individual, obviously against their will, and do all sorts of different things to them that way. And my guess would be that technology has probably been around a lot longer than what we would realize. And then even before maybe that was a possibility, they were doing all sorts of other stuff, So yeah, the fact that he was subjected to anything in prison makes tons of sense to me. I mean, when you look at some of his interviews, he is definitely, actually, I'll say that some Charles Manson interviews that we've watched, sometimes his actual mannerisms and his sort of like how he comes across, his appearance, looks crazier than what he's actually saying.
Yes.
When you actually hear the words that are coming out of his mouth, it actually makes sense. And I can kind of like read between the lines with crazy or whatever, and so for me, I feel like I've listened to some of his stuff and I'm like, oh, he's actually making good points. But unless you're skeptical and unless you understand how the world kind of works in a way with some of this type of stuff, you're just going to think that he's completely bonkers or whatever. But the way he looks, it looks more erratic and he looks a little wilder and everything else. And that's what they wanted too. Hence the swastika on the forehead, hence the hair. And then some of the photos of him too. Like there's a really classic photo of Charles Manson where people, when they want to make him look really nuts, he's on something, they dosed him or whatever, you could just see it in the eyes that he's on something. So a lot of this stuff is optics, they want to make him look a certain way. And then they also wanted to make the family look a certain way too. And so I asked you the other day, what's up with the girls when they shave their heads? There's a classic photo. There's several classic photos of like 4 of the girls from the family. When Manson was in prison, they shaved their heads and they're wearing these like really simple dresses sort of thing. And they're like seated outside of the courthouse or whatever. And they're almost like in a meditative posture.
Yeah.
It looks very Eastern. That's the other thing. I think there's a weird sort of like Eastern kind of like overlay with all of this stuff. And they wanted to associate, I think, probably Manson with like the idea of a guru, like an Eastern guru. And they wanted to make it seem like, oh, they have their own culture and they have their look. They all shave their heads because they have their way of doing things. And, like there's a religious sort of aspect going on here. It's like, yeah, all cults have something like that. But I really think whoever kind of designed aspects of this storyline really wanted to emphasize certain things like this. And so, of course, you show 4 young women and they're all, shaved, and then they're all seated down and they all have their hands out.
And that's when they had the X's on their forehead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that a lot of this stuff is just literally, it's like visuals. It's optics for the masses. because you're going to see that and you're going to have an emotional response.
Yeah.
You know, and you're not going to obviously look into it too deeply or anything like that. So anyways.
Well, and to your point with that, one of the things that Neil Sanders talks about, because I am rereading his book, which I just have to say, I've said this so many times, but Now is the Only Thing That's Real by Neil Sanders is a freaking awesome book. If you're into this information with Manson, he's such a great writer, and he really dives deep into different spaces that not many other people have. But one of the things he talks about is how, and it's recorded, but like during the trial, Manson was like they didn't let him cut his hair
exactly
and stuff like that.
Right.
So they wanted him to look like this
a certain kind of way.
Yeah, crazy hippie madman sort of thing. He was stripped of his like constitutional rights very quickly when he was being held. Like he went through all sorts of stuff where he wasn't even granted like his phone calls, and when he was, they were always cut short. And if he would like call somebody and they wouldn't answer, it was like counted against his phone calls, and like all these things. Like they definitely, you know, they had him, they knew they were using him, they'd been using him the whole time, you know, as whatever they wanted to put him out as. And it goes through, like, it shows in the trial when you really start looking at the stuff and reading between the lines, it's very obvious.
Right.
That he was being, you know, put up, like this image of him, you know, was being up. So back kind of to the, you know, the motorcycle clubs with Manson and the Straight Satans, not to be confused with the Satan Slaves, which I even kind of flipped them at one point because
I'll just say both great names.
both wonderful. I mean, doesn't it sound great?
100%, yeah.
Where do I sign?
I do like Satan's Slaves a little bit better.
Okay, I could see that. Yeah.
Just from a marketing perspective.
It is a little more brutal sounding or something.
Yeah. Anyways, go on.
And they just would refer to themselves as, or like each other as slaves. So they would like drop the Satan and they would just say, oh, it's hanging out with the slaves, you know, and it's just like, okay, sounds great, you know?
Right.
But anyway, so, okay, Straight Satans, very much hooked up with the Manson and the family. Danny DiCarlo is one of the names that is always talked about. He was like one of the leaders of the Straight Satans, if not the leader. He is the one that was like very much around the Spawn Ranch, hanging out with the family all the time. He was the boyfriend of Sadie, Susan Atkins, who was one of the main, you know, people that was at the murders and stuff. So they were hanging out all the time. Danny DiCarlo was around during the time of the bust, when they got busted at Spawn Ranch. Now, I was doing research and stuff, and I came across a channel. It's called Goodbye to Helter Skelter. And this guy has a podcast. He's on YouTube. He's an older dude. And he actually has some really good stuff that he's put together. And so he's basically also dispelling the mainstream story of the Manson stuff, going against the grain of like what Vincent Bugliosi was putting out there and the propaganda. And he had a photo. There's a photo out there of the day of the bust at Spawn Ranch. And it's Charlie Manson. And there's like a handful of cops. And then there's Danny DiCarlo, who is the guy from the Straight Satans. Danny DiCarlo's hands are cuffed in front of his body. Charles Manson's are cuffed behind him. And this guy from the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast made the point that isn't that a signal when the person is cuffed in the front that that's a snitch? Now, Danny DiCarlo was one of the people that testified against the family and ratted everybody out. So I was like, oh, interesting. Now, I had never heard about that little detail about being cuffed in the front. I don't know the technicality of all that. If anyone in the chat has ever heard that or knows about that, I'd love to hear about it. But I thought that was really interesting because it's like he was the snitch. So Danny DiCarlo of the Straight Satans was the one that he testified against everybody, basically, even his own girlfriend, as I'm assuming he didn't value her as like a wife kind of girlfriend. You know what we're talking about. So I'm sure he had many girlfriends, but So I'm not sure. He was cuffed in the front. And so I was like, interesting, duly noted. He was the snitch. He's the one that dropped all the knowledge. Now, what I think, this is my theory, and I've heard people speculate around it. I think that the straight Satans and maybe even Hell's Angels, but straight Satans specifically, I think they had a lot to do with the murders. And I think that I don't doubt, and like I've said, was this a huge psyop? Did the murders happen? I don't know, but let's assume that they did.
Okay.
Let's assume that they were all killed. Let's assume it went down in some way that they tell us in these stories. I think that the biker gangs, or at least this Danny DiCarlo guy, I think was way more involved. And I think that the killers, I think the way that these people were killed, I think how it happened, I think the La Bianca murders happening the night before and the connections to the La Biancas and the mob and the supermarkets and money. I think that...
Well, okay,
Sorry, that's where I'm going.
My initial hunch...
Uh-huh.
Is that when you look at the family, everyone's scrawny.
That's what I'm saying. They had to have muscle to do this shit. They had to have people that knew how to stab people, that knew how to kill people.
And we're okay doing it.
We're okay.
It's not their first rodeo.
And what are we talking about this whole time?
That's a good point, babe.
That these biker gangs were like literally hired security. They were hanging around the family for security reasons. Manson was doing sketchy shit. He needed security. He needed muscle. So it's like because there's also connections with the Gary Hinman murder, which happened before these main murders, which was also connected to the straight Satans because Gary Hinman was a drug dealer that was friends with Bobby Beausoleil. Bobby Beausoleil was a member of the family. He was also always hooked up with Kenneth Anger. He was doing porns. He was a musician. He lived with Gary Hinman at one point. The whole story with the Gary Hinman murder is that the straight Satans, Bobby Beausoleil went to Gary Hinman to buy mescaline to bring back to the ranch to give to the straight Satans so that they could buy it and they could sell it. The story goes that the mescaline that they got from Gary Hinman was quote unquote bad. And so they felt ripped off. Mm-hmm. So they told Bobby Beausoleil, go back to this guy's apartment, get our money back, whatever you have to do, get the money back. So Beausoleil goes back with a couple of the girls, supposedly. Gary Hinman tells him, I already spent the money. I don't have the money. I don't have it. They're beating him up, blah, blah, blah. Beausoleil doesn't know what to do. Charles Manson supposedly comes to Hinman's place, slices his ear off, slices his face with a sword that belonged to Danny DiCarlo. That's the story. That it just belonged to Danny DiCarlo. It wasn't Danny DiCarlo that did this, the slashing. It was Manson. Okay. I don't know. Is that true? Who knows? Then Manson or whoever slashed him in the face left and told Bobby Beausoleil, you're on your own. You have to deal with this, whatever. Gary Hinman wanted to go to the hospital because he's clearly like bleeding out. He wants help. Beausoleil was too afraid that if I take him to the hospital, he's going to rat us out. So Beausoleil stabbed him, killed him. Okay. That's the story, and I don't doubt that happened or whatever. Okay, because I could actually even see that happening, and that Beausoleil was trying to do anything he could to like not kill this guy, but was left with no option almost, so killed him.
Right.
Beausoleil ended up. I think he took Hinman's car, and then Beausoleil got arrested in San Luis Obispo, like I don't know how many weeks later it was, and they found the knife that he killed Hinman with in the car. So Beausoleil, not very smart, you know what I mean? So these kids weren't necessarily murderers. They didn't know what they were doing. They were kind of like being put up to stuff. They were being, who knows, whatever. I know the whole story is that they were brainwashed and they were culted out and this and that, which not to say that if you're taking acid every day for, a handful of years, you're probably going to get pretty fucking out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I just think that there's way more muscle behind all of this than they want the mainstream people to know, and that the mainstream story is telling us. That I really think that these biker gangs had a way bigger role to play, and I think that's why Danny DeCarlo, ratted the family out instead of ratting his brotherhood out. So that's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. Because for as long as I've been looking into this stuff and then diving deeper into the biker gangs and all that stuff, it's just like, dude, I think that that's what's going on.
If there were real murders, potentially it was people who know how to murder.
Yes.
Not first timers figuring it out or whatever. Because honestly, I feel like this is part of, I said it earlier, but the optics of everything is, it's really interesting to me that people are so afraid of Charles Manson, and he's put out there like he's this ultimate boogeyman. If you ask normal people on the street about Manson, they're going to say he murdered people.
Yes, that's what the mainstream story wants you to think.
Yeah, even though that's not true.
Right.
So he never actually did anything physically like that himself. None of these murders that supposedly happened, he's not tied to actually being present at the murder, right? Other people did it for him.
Right.
Is the thing, that he's the mastermind, so to say, right?
Right.
It's just really interesting that they put this guy out there, and there's all this pseudo-Nazi stuff associated with him, the swastika and whatever, and he doesn't look of that ilk. He just doesn't. And he is not someone that looks very intimidating. He looks intimidating from the crazy sort of perspective. Like, he looks kind of crazy. He looks nuts in some of the photos and stuff. But actually, as like a presence or whatever, he doesn't look very intimidating in that way.
Right.
And neither do any of the family members. So here's this radical cult that murders people, and they're just so insane and this and that. But they kind of look like they're all like anemic, and like they're like I don't know, it doesn't look like, yeah, it almost looks like they're not really in their bodies. It looks like they're up here a lot, because they probably were, because they were doing so many drugs and whatever.
Right.
And so it would make a lot of sense that if they were really serious about this for whatever reason, even if it was just for the narrative, for the news and whatever to put out there, it does make sense that they would hire people who would actually know a thing or two about getting this kind of work done, which it would, motorcycle guys, these people associated with these clubs, they would be the perfect people to hire.
They would. And I also do think, I do believe that, so I don't doubt that, Susan Atkins and Tex Watson and, Leslie Van Houten and these other people that were associated with the murder, I would bet that they went. Maybe they could have been accessories. Maybe they did stab certain people or whatever, But I just think that there had to have been something bigger going on with it than what anyone has really kind of talked about. I mean, not to say that I'm the first one to say this, because there's definitely people that say that the motorcycle.
Yeah, you're not getting this from nowhere.
No, but exactly. It's like I feel like I'm just connecting more of these dots with, everything else that I've learned and stuff. And I'm just like, I mean, to me, it kind of seems like a no-brainer when you step back and look at it.
Because it's possible one of the things that you've been talking about for a while is dispelling the myth that it is this hardcore occult, esoteric, witchcraft sort of magical kind of thing.
Right.
And that it was actually more of a seedy underbelly of Southern California sort of thing, where when you get into any underbelly of any city, of any place, what are you going to come across? Sex, you're going to come across drugs, you're going to come across mafia type stuff, you're going to come across a lot of these types of things. Money. So it's more of just like kind of typical underworld stuff, potentially.
Yeah.
Versus it being this whole thing. But for whatever reason, they fabricated the storyline, and people know it as they know it now, and it's a cult thing. But as I've said before, I don't know if I've said it during the Summer Love stuff, a lot of cults have been created, my understanding is, especially starting in the 60s, for various purposes. And in actuality, The cult is the sort of cutout that is put out there in the public, but in actuality, who's really running things or what's really going on is that there's actually like an intelligence sort of component behind the cult.
Right.
But they can get away with all sorts of stuff by having these people put out there as like, oh, it's this crazy cult and they were up to all sorts of crazy things and this and that. And it's like, but in actuality, there was actually a whole entire orchestrated sort of effort behind it. And it wasn't just this guru who wanted to do X, Y, or Z. It's like, no, he's being either just put out there as kind of like the fall guy if something were to be exposed, like in the news and the media and everything else, or he's being put up to do some of these things for experimental purposes or for business purposes or who knows what.
Yeah.
You know, so this could just be one of those things where it's just like, okay, cool. Yeah. Who's really involved? Probably lots of important people, lots of money. There's drugs, there's trafficking, human trafficking involved. Okay. Let's pin it all on this guy.
Right.
Yeah. He was involved in all of it too, but let's pin it on this guy. And, you know, then everyone is kind of, everyone will just believe that storyline and no one will ever know the truth or whatever.
Right.
Because there's holes everywhere.
There's
with the official
holes.
narrative.
There's huge holes, and there's so many little tidbits of evidence, you know, that, you know, just for example, there's one of the stories is that, so these murders, with the main murders happened in Benedict Canyon, okay, in LA, and, there's the story that a man's son was out in their yard and found a gun.
Right.
He found a gun, and the dad called the cops and reported the gun, and the gun matched the gun that was the bullets that had been found at the Tate house, and I think it was a .22, if I remember right. And so, and the handle of the gun was broken. And that's one of the parts of the story with the that Vitek Frykowski was hit in the head, and they broke the butt of the gun or the handle of the gun. That's part of the mainstream story. Okay, so they found that gun. The son finds the gun in the yard. Dad reports it. Cops come to get it, and the dad says that, you know, when he got the gun from his son, he was very careful to not touch it with his hands because he knows that this is evidence. Yeah. Okay, so whatever it came from, I should probably not touch it because they're gonna fingerprint it and everything. This guy talks about how the cops came and they just grabbed the gun. They didn't put it into an evidence bag. They didn't wipe it down for fingerprints. They didn't do anything. And the dad was very shocked by that. And he was taken back and thought, that's really weird. Like, I would think that they would have handled that a little bit better. Dad calls the cops about a week later to find out what happened to the gun. And they tell them that it was destroyed.
Right.
And that was the story. And the guy whose son found the gun had a friend in the newspapers or something, and he ended up calling a journalist and being like, something's wrong with this. This happened. They told him the story. It started getting out there. All of a sudden, the cops say, we found the gun again. Okay, right. Here it is. We have it. It's booked as evidence.
Right.
So, you know, there's all these little things. And then Neil Sanders makes the point of like, it seems to me the cops handled the gun as though they weren't going to treat it as evidence at all, and they were just going to disregard it. Now, anyone would know, like, if someone finds a gun like that matches the actual bullets that were used in a murder that happened literally just not far away. I mean, come on now.
Well, you know what I've heard? I think it's true probably that the bigger the police force, the bigger the city, the more crooked they are.
Yeah.
And you just can't trust them.
Right.
You know, sort of thing. But I've heard in particular LAPD.
Oh, God. I can only imagine.
And that for a long time, LAPD is just... they have their own set of rules. They have their own internal hierarchy. They have their own whatever. They have their way of doing everything. And that, like, 1,000%, that of all of the different police departments out there, you can't take their word for anything.
Right.
That there's definitely agendas. There's protected people. There's cover-ups. There's all sorts of stuff going on. So that's who we're dealing with, right?
Well, exactly. And they're in cahoots with all these people.
Right.
So they have their asses to cover, because the other thing about the murders at Cilio Drive is that the Vitek or Vortek Frykowski was a manufacturer of MDA, which was very new at that time in the 60s. Mm-hmm. So that's also known, it's mescaline. That's the main substance in MDA. He was manufacturing it. He was also distributing it and selling it. Well, what were the straight Satans also distributing and selling? Mescaline. So they knew who Vortek Frykowski was. They knew him. They all knew who the Hollywood people were, because they were all partying together and talking about seedy underbelly stuff. These people had shit to cover up, because it's also very well known that when Roman Polanski got back into the country after this murder happened, Jack Nicholson, of all people, and Roman Polanski were the only people that were allowed into the house. Why are they going in before anyone else can go in? What are they getting that they need to hide? The same thing happened at the J. Sebring residence, and it's recorded by the maid at J. Sebring's house, who was one of the victims, who was the hairdresser for the stars. It's recorded by the maid that there were people coming to the house the day after the murder, and they came into the house twice. And she doesn't know why they were there. She was told to just let them go in. Mm-hmm. What were they getting? What did they have to cover up? You know what I mean? These people are, we know what is up in that sense when it comes to all the things that are going on, and, reputations and stuff like that. And it's very well known, too, at that time, particularly at the Polanski residence, that there were snuff films being recorded. There were there's all weird instances of people being tied up and humiliated, and I'm pretty sure it was Dennis Hopper was one of them that witnessed something like that go down, where someone was tied to a tree and assaulted, and and Sharon Tate's in the video, so there's all this sort of stuff going on. And I just really do think that a lot of this whole thing was drugs and to cover up shit that somebody did that was going to be exposed at some point.
It's not the most important detail ever, but I do think it's interesting that Jack Nicholson was an Easy Rider, and that's probably
no, he wasn't an Easy Rider. He was in that other.
No, he's in both.
Oh, he is an Easy Rider too.
Yeah.
Oh, because but he was in the
there's another
Hell's Angels on Wheels, or
that
was 1967 when that came out. But that was before Easy Rider.
Right. So it's just interesting that he's in 2 motorcycle movies. And then is Dennis Hopper an Easy Rider too?
Yes.
Right?
And Jane Fonda.
Right.
Peter Fonda.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So anyway, it's just random, but
it's very random, but it's also not random. You know what I mean? It's almost like foreshadowing. There's foreshadowing going on or whatever.
Right.
So anyway, I just think it's all very interesting and intriguing. And as I'm rereading this book by Neil Sanders, I'm just like, dude, this story to me, this whole weave, there's so much to uncover still. And I think that, I don't know, I just think it's very interesting timing too, with the Leslie Van Houten getting released from prison. I was kind of tripping out when I heard that. I'm like, man, and then what are the odds that we're re-jumping back into all this stuff?
Well, that's the thing, is that you can tell that it's a narrative that's being propped up.
Yeah.
Because Charles Manson, for the rest of his life, every couple years or whatever, every few years, there's always some new thing.
Yeah.
Of they needed to roll him out. And that's what I noticed, at least as a kid, all the way up until his death. I was just like, okay, they just roll out this boogeyman every couple of years. And they show him getting older. And my personal opinion is, when you look at some of the photos of him, I would not be shocked if there was at some point a replacement or a switcheroo. And that maybe there was
Manson,
Manson, that maybe there were multiple Mansons over the years. I don't know. That wouldn't shock me. And so I just feel like the historical figures, if you want to put it that way, that they continually remind you about, and the stories that they continually remind you about, something's up. You know, they don't want you to forget. You know, there's been energy and there's been a concerted effort to make sure that these storylines come across a certain kind of way. And propaganda, a lot of propaganda is repeat. That's what advertising is.
Right.
You say it over and over and over and over and over. Even though everybody fucking knows about Coca-Cola, you know how big their advertising budget is? You know how many times you've seen their billboard? You know how many McDonald's golden arches you've seen over your lifetime, you know?
Right.
So repetition is a key part of mind control, and it's a key part of propaganda. And so I think just by virtue of that fact, you can guarantee that the Charles Manson story, it's not just this story that organically happened that we need to keep in mind because of any kind of like altruistic sort of reason or anything like that. It has to do because it's a top down sort of thing. People up here, whoever these spin masters are or whatever, they want it to be out there. They want it to be part of the public consciousness or whatever.
Right.
And then freaking even Tarantino. I mean, you know, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh man.
It's just like, okay, cool. So he took advantage of that and then he had his own spin with it. We thought it was awful. You know, we know that it's not close to reality, like at all. And obviously he intentionally took liberties with the storyline and he sensationalized it and he made it his own sort of thing, like a Pulp Fiction or Kill Bill or whatever. And by doing so, he's just adding to the fuel of this whole entire thing.
Right.
You know, so.
Yeah. And what I will give to Tarantino, you know, with that film is that I think he caught the essence of the era really well. I think that, you know, I think he did a good job of finding the right cars and the right, you know, vibe and all that stuff. But in terms of a storyline or whatever, yeah, for people who, I just think, yeah, it's another one of those cul-de-sac, you know, event movie things for people who are like a younger generation who've maybe never even really looked into the Manson stuff, but then they go and see the Tarantino film and then, you know, whatever. I think it's a cul-de-sac sort of thing. But,
yeah, totally.
You know,
totally.
Yeah.
Well, let's check the chat again.
Yeah.
And then if we have any final thoughts, we can get to it.
Sounds good. Because
I've seen some comments come in that are very interesting.
Nice. This is a fun one, guys. Thanks for hanging out.
Guys, she loves this stuff.
I do.
If you didn't know.
I swear, man, I feel like, I don't know. I'm stoked that I'm finding more people talking about Manson stuff on more of this level, like closer to. So I'm wanting to like interview some of these researchers.
I think you should.
Because I love it so much. And I think that it's valuable to question everything. But
okay, so going back a little bit, The Branch says the bottomless pit is a motif in Revelation from which emerges the beast.
Aha, interesting.
Also, this is just more of a symbolic thing. I think I know this for a fact.
May I?
Yeah, go for it. It's my last one. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Feel free. I don't care.
I took his last mint.
Yeah. The idea of going into the desert is, in the Western occult world, has been linked to traveling to the underworld, which I've talked to you about recently.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so there's stories of Crowley going to the desert and having crazy sex and doing rituals out there. And the idea of the family going to the desert and waiting out this helter-skelter race war sort of thing. I know from an occult perspective, that has been the link, that crossing the desert or going to the desert is symbolic of crossing the abyss and going to the other side, going to the underworld. And the more I've read about that, the more it just makes perfect sense. And so if there is kind of an esoteric angle here with all of that, I just wonder if somehow that's being encoded or layered and woven into everything.
Right.
You know, so just kind of throwing that out there.
It's a good thought.
So the bottomless pit in the desert. So, yeah, what's that all about? Morris says Charles probably got a glimpse of the underground on LSD.
Yeah.
Probably
did.
Yeah. And then he also said Manson was given LSD in prison.
Yeah, that's the comment. Yeah, thank you, Morris. That's what, kind of sparked my memory of all the other things I've heard about his time in prison, too.
Right. Which, goddamn, man. Against your will. Holy shit. I can't even imagine.
No, it's terrifying in its own way.
So, Tattoo Dave says, I think George Martin deserves more writing credits on Beatles songs. Yeah, he's their producer, right? So this is interesting, dude. We're going to get it. We're going to do a Beatles episode. Yeah. If you know a lot about the Beatles, by the way, maybe we should chat sometime soon. And I can just kind of, see what you know about them, because I'm just finding them to be so interesting again. I kind of, every couple of years, I feel like I get back into a Beatles rabbit hole or whatever. But George Martin is credited for being like the fifth Beatle. There's a few people that have been credited as the fifth Beatle, but people say that George Martin is like the one. And so it's really interesting when you're talking about the fifth of anything. It's like talking about the fifth element. It's like the brains behind the operation. It's like you're talking about spirit, or you're talking about your head, and your appendages would be the four, other aspects of your body. So then it would be kind of like each appendage correlates with one of the four traditional elements, but then your head symbolically correlates with spirit, in that it kind of controls everything else that's going on here.
Okay.
So there's a transcendental aspect to the fifth of anything, basically. So George Martin being the fifth Beatle, he is like the guy that was the go-between between the Beatles and then whoever he was working for, MI5 or whoever, sort of thing. So he definitely deserves more credit for sure. And a lot of these studio musicians deserve more credit as well. And a few of them have publicly come out and said, I drummed on like 22 Beatles tracks.
Wow.
Like world-class badass drummers from back in the day have said that. So anyway, it's the deal. I just think it's totally the deal.
I mean, I've said this as we've been talking about the Beatles, and to some of my good friends who love the Beatles or whatever, I think about them just loving them so much and never questioning why or how or anything. It's just wild. And there's everybody, like so many people, everyone knows who the Beatles is. Oh, like them or hate them.
Once again,
everyone still knows who they are.
These storylines, these people that are continually put out there forever. Why?
Right.
Because it serves some sort of agenda.
Right.
The thing I've been tripping out on, and this is going to be like one of the core sort of elements when we do a Beatles episode, their whole catalog, guys. I've said this already, but
put it in the chat. Ask in the chat how long people think.
Okay, or I can just ask
save
right
it,
now.
or you can save it.
Are you saying for next time or right now?
Or right now, or when we do the episode.
Okay, so just think about the Beatles, what they looked like early on in their career. Hold my hand and this and that and whatever sort of stuff. And it's black and white. They're wearing their skinny pants and they have the mop top and everything else. They're on Ed Sullivan or something. Think about that. And then think about their like last performance, which is like the rooftop, Let It Be sort of stuff.
Right.
How many years passed between that first, or, these first videos of them kind of getting really, really popular and then later on? Guys,
it's a great question.
Their whole career, 12 albums, 200 something songs. Their whole career spanned 7 years.
That's like insane.
It's fucking nuts. It does not make any sense.
It's like impossible.
12 albums in 7 years?
Right.
And you're the Beatles?
Right.
And so literally
you're touring and you're doing movies.
Yeah.
And you're doing shows and you're doing appearances and you're recording and
some of their earliest footage.
Give me a break.
Is from 62, 63. And then like their circuit of when they got really popular was like 63, 64. And those are some of the videos I'm thinking of right now from their earliest records and stuff. And then literally from 64 to 70, that's when they put out all of their stuff. It's completely nuts, or 63 to 70. So it's just, it boggles the mind. I'm like, there's just no way.
Well, and the reason I said have people guess in the chat or whatever is because when we were back with Mario's folks, Mario asked his parents, he said, guys, how long do you think the Beatles' career was or whatever? And your dad said like 30 years. Your mom said like 50 years, you know?
Yeah.
And that would be, you know, not like a far off, I guess. Because
30 years would be much closer.
30 years would be much closer.
50
was precedent, but
I was going to say I don't know if they're the best like sample group on that one.
Well, my point is though.
But that's what they have in their minds though.
Exactly. So that's what they thought, because just to think about their catalog, how many albums they had, how much they changed over the years.
Dude, exactly.
Rightfully so that someone would think that was decades long.
Because by the time of the end of their career, they had shaggy hair is like longer, and they're wearing like fur like coats and stuff,
right.
And they're wearing like bell bottom type things and whatever. They're completely different. Even the music, it's just like radically different.
Yeah.
You know, so to me, I'm just like, I just think about 7 years ago. If anyone just look back 7 years ago, I'm sure most people here are in their my guess would be 30s, 40s, 50s sort of thing,
or younger, but who knows?
Potentially younger.
Yeah.
But think about 7 years ago.
Right.
That was the whole entire Beatles career arc with 12 albums. It's just nuts. So anyway,
I don't know, man.
We'll get into it at some point. So Ben brought up a good point, and people were talking about this. He says, dude, you should see the weird colors they paint in those isolation rooms, because I know Ben has experience with that shit. And he said, pastel pink and pastel blue, they told us they were calming colors.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah, I think they're meant to do something to you psychologically, obviously.
Yeah.
That's what he's implying.
Israel Adams is saying Guantanamo is the same way.
Yeah, I'm assuming either, I don't know if he's talking about the paint or he's talking about the frequency rooms or whatever. Either way, it would not surprise me. So Katrina's saying, wow, no way, a frequency room. Now that you say, I can't believe it exists and they've been using it. Yeah, dude, for sure. It makes sense to me too. So yeah, Leaves of Grass. Hey, Amy.
What's up, Amy?
She was saying, what do you think was the significance of those colors? And then Ben is saying, they said it was calming, but I think they are maddening. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's kind of interesting, Moonlander, that they're infantilizing. So I could see that for sure. Yeah, exactly. So kind of to his point, same colors they provide in hospital maternity wards.
Wow. Yeah, that is
interesting.
That's a good insight, Stephanie.
Ben here is just saying, super interesting. Both of you thought the same from those colors.
Yeah.
Okay. So the branch is saying shaving the head is sometimes a sign of mourning in the Bible while wearing sackcloth. Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, Hank.
And then Flat Earth Hippie Hank is saying, Squeaky Fromm and her gang murdered the people in the house next door to my brother's house in the desert. Oh, interesting.
Damn. Okay, Hank, I want to talk to you about that. Maybe we can call each other.
Katrina's just saying, guys, this chat is on fire. Who knew Hell's Angels could dig up so much dirt and conspiracies? I never thought to look into the background of these orgs. Yeah,
nice.
Yeah.
Glad you're enjoying it. I know, this is a fun one, isn't it?
Totally.
I feel like there's so many layers.
What's up, Jake? How's it going, man?
Howdy, Jake.
We actually shouted you out earlier. I did, at least, because of your comment that you left on your Telegram. Let's see.
Okay, Ben is asking if he was belly cuffed. Does that mean when you have like a chain around your belly?
Normally, you're cuffed in front and going to court, but it's tied around your belly. Even if you're a fighter, they will eventually handcuff your thumbs together.
Huh. It wasn't a chain. It was just his hands were just like in front of his torso. They were just in front of his torso, cuffed together.
Morris is saying Courtney Love paid $50K to a Hell's Angel to kill Kurt Cobain.
Ooh, okay. I like that one. Oh, you know what? I do remember that part of that story because there was a guy that did like a handful of documentaries. He did like the true story on the Kurt one, and then Jimi Hendrix.
He mentioned that.
He mentions that. He ties that weave in about the Hell's Angel. Great point, Morris.
I mean, who knows what other storylines they've been connected to that we're just completely unaware of.
Right.
Sarah G, what's up, Sarah?
Hey, Sarah. Nice
I don't know if we
ya.
said hey to Benna, but what's up, Benna?
Hey, Benna.
And then Walk and Talk is here. Hello. Let's see.
Yeah, I love this weave so much. Oh my God. It's so fun.
Here the question is, if it is a framing, what is the goal for the Manson murders? Did this change legislation or have some other social effect? I would say it's probably more of a social effect from what I gather.
I think so. I think that I kind of think that it was symbolically an end to the hippie era. Like they wanted to, bring this down with something total opposite of what the hippies maybe stood for or whatever. Also, even talking to people, even talking to Mario's mom about this. Your mom brought this up to me. Her and I were having a conversation because I was reading the book while we were back at your house, your mom's house, and
she asked about it?
Well, I was just reading it. And she goes, "Oh, what are you reading?" And I showed her the book and everything. And she goes, "Oh, my God, I remember." She remembered when she was a little girl when this happened. Like, she was young. But she said that's when people started locking their doors.
That's the classic thing that people say.
And that is the classic thing you hear people say that were alive during that time, that before the Manson murders, people didn't lock their doors. It was like, no big whoop, whatever. And then as soon as that happened, people everywhere, like across the United States, at least I can speak for, from what I can gather, that's when people were like
totally
really freaked out. There was even a woman, I was watching an interview about, because Leslie Van Houten was released, I found an interview of a woman who was a member of the family, and she had written a book, and she was just being interviewed about the book or whatever. And she was saying that she had been talking to a woman that she said that she was finally okay with going to California when Manson died.
Oh, wow.
When they announced that Manson died in 2017, she said, finally, I can go to California. She was that afraid.
Was that a legit?
I don't know. But that's just like...
That's interesting.
That's just what the woman said. I don't know if it's real
or whatever.
Who knows,
maybe.
But, I mean, that's how terrified of Manson people were.
Yeah, I would say... It's very similar to a lot of these hoax events.
Yeah.
Where there's a mass killing or whatever, and it didn't really happen, but they want you to believe that it happened. Whether this actually happened or didn't happen, it's almost like I think Rahm Emanuel, he said something like, "Never let a good crisis go to waste."
Right.
So if it was a legitimate, organic happening, they weren't going to let a good crisis go to waste. If it were orchestrated, it still serves the same purpose, and it's fear and trauma.
Right.
And you keep the people in fear, you keep them traumatized, and they're more malleable, and you can get away with so much stuff. So that's why the news is the way it is, So I look at it as just kind of like it's like a fear trauma campaign sort of thing.
Yeah.
Psychological campaign, psyop.
Totally.
Sort of deal. So good question, though.
Yeah, that is a great question.
Let's see here. All right. Right. Small town sheriffs are the only ones who may be okay. Yeah, I mean, I essentially see it that way as well. So, yeah, totally. Morris is saying that the Beach Boys were in touch with Charles Manson.
Yes,
for
they
sure.
were.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, Brian Wilson, or not Brian Wilson, sorry, Dennis Wilson to be exact, who was the drummer of the Beach Boys.
And then Tattoo Dave says, back in 1969, how many LA cops were also probably Masons? My guess a lot. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's all part of the same soup, for sure. I agree with you there. Okay, interesting. I've never heard this take. Maybe you have, Bub. Manson was the first victim of the United States justice system televised.
Oh, interesting.
Well, that's the other angle with the 60s is things were televised.
Right. Like, so you had Vietnam.
And then you had the Beatles on TV, and then you had the moon landing, and you had JFK.
Yep.
You had all of these things that for the first time, the mass adoption rate of television and over-the-air whatever, it was at an all-time high, obviously, in the 60s. And so a lot more people were exposed to a lot more media, visual, video media than they ever had before.
Right.
So that's a huge important angle, which is one of the things I brought up earlier is there's always like a transhuman tech sort of thing. I think that's part of the heart of the 60s movement. And I think in a lot of ways, the moon landing and 2001 A Space Odyssey are kind of really good vehicles to kind of talk about that aspect of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's an intriguing angle, Morris. They let Hinckley out and he makes old-timey music now, Benjamin Balderson was saying.
Huh.
So, let's see. Huh. Okay, so Sarah's, this is interesting. So she said this before, but an ex, his father strangely had a party with Hopper and Nicholson in Taos where they had smeared shit all over an outbuilding, and my friend was forced to clean it up as a child. What the hell? Interesting.
That sounds like something they would do, too.
Yeah.
Like, and then force a child to clean it up.
Right. Yeah, that's new to me.
Talk about traumatizing.
Yeah, I've heard Nicholson. There's all sorts of seedy stuff with that guy that I don't know. I don't know too many details, but I've heard just things. Over
He
the
just
years.
looks like he would be up to no good.
All right. Let's see.
Girls love murder mystery type shit. It's true.
Oh yeah, dude. There you go.
Or like true crime and stuff.
True crime. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. This is her true crime sort of outlet.
It totally is. That's funny.
Yeah. So, Jamie, I like that term cul-de-sac you used to describe movies that go nowhere. Is that how you meant it?
Yes.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, like to like herd the masses into a place, and then they all just start buzzing around, and they stay in that area, you know, and it's like intentional with so many things.
Yeah, yeah. Not exclusive to movies.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Let's see here. Yeah, exactly. I brought up the desert and crossing the abyss. Yep, Desert of Set. Exactly right. That's the connection. Benjamin saying, "Fuck the desert. That is hell." That's basically.
I mean, it's a slice of it. I'm so intrigued by the desert. Like, yeah. Dude, it's so intriguing. There's something about it that's like, whoa. I don't know. There's like a mystery.
Right. I
mean, a lot of places can be like that, but.
Leaves of Grass, 5/5th, Jacob's Ladder to Another Realm. Yep, that's how I see it too.
Interesting.
It's a transcendental number for a lot of different reasons. I don't know. What's up, Lumber, Just Me, Fortune, Cookie, Chess?
Nice.
All right. Okay. All right. Good comments, dudes. Let's see here. Aw, thank you, Amy. That's very nice. Hi, Mario, Michelle. You two set my bar for relationship goals, followed by laughing emojis. Love you two together. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. That's very nice.
For sure.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Okay, Ben is answering that.
Yeah, that's not how they cuff you. He was getting special treatment. Going to court, you're always tied to your belly.
Yes.
Well, the other thing.
Okay, thank you, Ben.
And maybe it's part of the rumor mill. I don't know, but kind of related. But people have said that Charles Manson in court was flashing Masonic hand signs and stuff.
Oh yeah, I've heard that.
And that he was communicating either with the judge or whomever else in the courtroom, and that somehow he was like in cahoots, or somehow he was speaking in an encoded way, and that he had learned some of this stuff. So yeah, I mean, maybe there's a lot of, who knows, maybe there's lots of evidence out there if like you start looking at these videos and photos and analyze them through a different lens, like, oh yeah, they're actually signaling a few things here. And
yeah,
well, even some of the photos that we just recently saw, they look totally staged.
Yeah, they do.
So we just saw some photos of Manson in the courtroom with some cops and stuff.
Yeah.
It looked super fabricated. It looked like it was like a photo shoot.
Yeah, it does.
So,
it does. And it's very obvious.
It did not look natural at all. Oh, cool. So Hank is saying that he'd be happy to share more.
Cool. I'd love to hear it. That's awesome.
And then Ben says, I would have assumed the Zodiac killings were more the cause for that. I'm not sure what he's referring to there. Did the Zodiac killings, was that the 60s too?
I think so. I know it was in I know it was in San Francisco.
Right.
That movie Zodiac is really good.
I think he's referring to locking doors and stuff.
Oh, okay.
But I've heard the same thing. Maybe it's from my parents. I don't know.
Maybe.
But I've heard the same thing about the Manson stuff.
Maybe it's more of his parents' generation.
Right.
So, which they were born in 56, which is basically when my dad was born as well. So, I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, I still don't like your doors. I get it.
The Manson murders, it was a one and done where the Zodiac killer was at large.
Ah, right. So it was more of like a, where is he? When will he strike again?
Right. And Jamie Linson, and it created even more disdain for the counterculture.
And it gave communes a bad name. I think that may have been one of the socializing things. So it was like, there were so many communes popping up everywhere. So then it was like, if you're in a commune, then are you a murderous cult too or whatever?
Right.
Communes aren't my favorite thing, I would say, by any means. But, that was what was going on during that time.
So Lumber Person here says, Luther and Valentine and Manson's son's name seem suspect. Son name inverse of man's son. Huh. I wasn't aware of his son's name, but we might have to look into that. I do think I'll just talk about it very briefly. Charles Manson... When I was thinking about it the other night, Char, for some reason, came out very strongly.
Yeah, that's in my notes, actually.
So Char, Manson. It's like, to me, it's just like burn the son of man. It's like a sacrificial sort of stuff. It's like a burnt offering, which is what Holocaust means. So to me, I'm just like, wait a second. Is his name encoding that he was a sacrificial offering of some kind to take the hit for this whole entire situation or whatever?
Right.
I don't really know, but even the last name, Manson, it is curious.
Right.
Which, if that is the case, there's lots of esoteric, symbolic stuff we can get into with that. Yeah, exactly, dude. Ben, 100%. Isn't it interesting how many serial killers there were in a very short time, and now that shit doesn't happen, it's mass murders. Exactly.
Yeah, that is a good point.
That's the transition.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. That I see it that way too, dude. Good call. Right. So now they're kind of talking about Bundy, Dahmer, Ed Gein. All right.
Yeah, Morris is saying Manson's probation officer was shady. Yeah, well, and he also got, like, for a man that was on probation, like, for the most of the part of when all these events happened, like, he got off pretty well. I mean, he did stuff that he was crossing state borders and doing all sorts of shit that anyone that's actually on parole wouldn't be able to get away with.
What's up, Jason?
Hey, Jason. Nice to see you.
Yeah, so cool. I think that'll do it. Is there anything else that you wanted to get around to? I might hit the restroom real quick.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Go for it. I think that I got to everything that I really wanted to talk about. Did you? I'm assuming you did as well.
I think so.
I just think too, like, this is an ongoing weave for us. And as we're doing the Summer of Love or whatever. So I just think that now that we've tapped the We've tapped this tap here, this keg of the Hell's Angels. I know that they're going to keep coming up because, I encourage people, if they're into it, look up some of these images. Maybe I'll post some on Telegram or Instagram or something, but some of the images we talked about with Danny DiCarlo being cuffed in the front, and it's a pretty, if you just put in bust at Spawn Ranch, Charles Manson raid Spawn Ranch, it'll come up, and it's just a particular photo, and you'll see it because the guy who's cuffed in front is Danny DiCarlo, and I just thought it was a wonderful, great, insightful point made by Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast on YouTube, that's something to consider. And then Ben kind of confirmed that there might have been something going on with that. Look up some of these photos. And then, as we said in the beginning, for people who may have not heard, the underlying, like, gay homoerotic tones with the biker gangs. There's a handful of photos out there where with Hell's Angels, and they're literally a group of them. There's two of them like tonguing behind, and it's like disturbing, but it's like weird. And then you're in your mind, you're just like, wait, what? Aren't these supposed to be like rough and tumble macho man?
No,
exactly. And so
well,
it's like
you're like yes and no,
and it's like the total inversion.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, it's a thing.
No, it totally is a thing. Well, another thing, 'cause you're going to find that everywhere. I'm kind of just convinced that it's like,
it's not
in
just
the mafia and with these elite families, whatever. It's just like, it's totally a thing. But one of the things that we found yesterday that I thought was interesting while we were just watching stuff and came across some photos, one of the members of the family doesn't look like a girl.
Oh, that's right.
Looks like a boy.
Yeah, like it's like straight up like a boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you could tell with the shoulders, with the jawline, with the hair, the proportions of their bones, with their arms and stuff.
Right.
It looks like it's a classic case of born a dude. However it ends up happening, I'm kind of convinced that there's a lot of families where this is just their deal. You know, people have referred to it as elite gender inversion.
Okay.
And that some of these families, especially around the Hollywood area,
right,
especially in the entertainment industry, especially in royal families and shit like that, that this is just their culture. This is how they roll. And so they invert their child's sex. And now it shouldn't be that surprising now when you look at the world we live in.
Yeah, right. And especially where we're at right now in this era.
So people have been doing this for a long time. And so there's just, once you're open to it and once you kind of like know what to look for, you're unfortunately going to see it all over the place. And so when you look at how common it is now, it shouldn't be a surprise.
Right.
That people have been doing it on the underground for a long time. But one of the family members, totally all of the signatures of actually having been born a boy.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of worth looking into. We didn't even get into it last night, but I just saw that photo. I'm like, that's a switcheroo right there.
Yeah, you can tell. And again, if this whole thing was more contrived and manipulated, who knows? I mean, a lot of these kids that were in the family, like some of the parents, like, I don't know. There's even parents that knew that their children were like going off to be hippies and
right,
stuff like that. And some of these kids that were in the family came from upper middle class homes. Not all of them were like came from abusive homes or anything like that. There's a couple of them, Susan Adkins in particular seems to have had a pretty rough childhood. But a lot of these kids were just like who a lot of the hippie kids were. They're like kind of on the wealthier side, were able to just leave home and go and whatever. So who knows? Right.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's just read the final chats here, and then we can get to our little end credit slides. So, yeah, dude, Jason, it's over, man. Sorry, but we'll be back. Ben, I used to sling Mexican brick to the Angels.
Dude, nice.
I'm glad you're here, dude.
Me too, as always. I know our friend Bud, who we've talked about so many times. I mean, he has so many stories of dealing drugs in Mexico and bringing them back up and hanging out with these LA types and everything. So
yeah, Ben's saying that part is super weird. I don't get that at all. I've known a lot of Angels. I think he's talking about them kissing
the
each
gay
other and stuff. Because we've heard them talk about it too. At least in one interview, I heard them talk about it. So maybe it is more of a thing that certain clubs used to do, or just really, a few individuals or whatever, or maybe it was back in the day.
Right.
I could totally see it not being a thing now. Although I will say, I don't know if we have any Europeans watching or whatever, but we saw some Hell's Angels from like Europe, and there was a huge gathering, and all of the patches were like England and Germany and like Finland and like all over the place, and they had all met up. And a lot of those guys look very metro. Yeah. Like metrosexual, actually. I was kind of
like
surprised.
More fashion forward.
So it could just be European sensibilities, but I kind of got that vibe too, that there might be some stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it may not be a universal thing. I don't want to claim that because I'm sure there's plenty of angels who would not be having it. Would be my guess.
Yeah, who knows?
All right, so gotcha. Right.
Yeah,
I could see that, dude. That was your experience for sure. Yeah, Leaves of Grass, transgenderism stepping into the transhuman agenda. I see that component as well. Right. All right, talking strawberries in here for some reason.
Nice.
Talking, I see some comments about Longo and Juan. Sweet. All right. Gotcha. Nice. Awesome. I think that'll do it, baby.
I think so. This was a great one.
Thanks for hanging, dudes.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Once again, thank you to all of our patrons who we have right here. All of these people to thank. All of these fine folk.
Yep. Some of you are here right now in the chat. So thank you guys so much for your continued support. It honestly, it's really very helpful for us. And it's helping us to continue weaving these things out and coming to you guys live and doing all the things that we're doing. So thank you.
Totally. So once again, if you want to support via Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/thehealinghome. And then you have a show on Tuesday.
Yeah, next week, me and Cheney are going to get down. So Cheney of Project Cheney is coming on to the Healing Home next week, which is the 25th at 4 p.m. So I talked about this on Tuesday, but I really got to know Cheney through Weaving Spiders Welcome, What's Up Spiders, and just really love where she's at, what she's doing. I really like her energy. She has a lot to share, and she herself went through a journey with cancer, and I really want to talk to her about that and talk to her about her experience and what's going on, how she's feeling right now. So I'm looking forward to talking to Cheney. So come and join us next week, Tuesday, on the Healing Home. Yeah, it'll be great.
Totally. And dude, her when she's on, like, her sort of ability to connect the dots with certain stories and symbols and whatever, it's very, very interesting. I've learned a lot from listening to her.
Yeah.
And then your next Full Moon Offering newsletter is on the 1st.
Yep, August 1st. And there are 2 full moons in August, just a heads up for everybody. But the first offering will be coming out on the 1st, and then the second full moon will be a blue moon here in August. So it's going to be a moony sort of month here in August. Still have available my fresh St. John's wort tincture and anointing oil set. The stuff is really lovely. Very, very nice red medicine. Lovely for this time of year because it can protect you from the sun. So the whole thing with this set that I wanted to do is that because sometimes when you take St. John's wort internally, it can make you photosensitive to the sun, which means you could be prone to sunburn a little bit more. But the beautiful thing about when you use it as an infused oil, it can protect you from the sun. So the oil is the antidote to the tincture in its own way. But both together are just a wonderful combination for all sorts of things. St. John's wort's wonderful for nerve pain topically.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it's like a great remedy for sciatica. So if somebody's suffering from, problems with like the SI joint, sciatic nerve that runs down the leg, St. John's wort can be wonderful for that. So hit me up if you're wanting some St. John's wort medicine made with the fresh plant, which is very, very important.
Totally.
And up here is the menu, what I have currently, if you are watching or if you're just listening, no big whoop. But I've got a handful of products that are available. Another thing with St. John's wort oil in it is my CBD and St. John's wort massage and body oil, which is another wonderful one. That's a great massage oil for before bed. Just the combination, St. John's wort and cannabis is a dynamic duo, I just have to say. So that's a really great massage oil. And I only have 1 bottle left. So if you want to give that a shot, hit me up for that as well.
But how do they do that? If they want one of your products, what do they do?
Oh, what will they do? Email me, michelleshealinghome@gmail.com. Pretty soon we're going to have a store, though, an online store, which will be really fun. So by the end of the summer, we'll have that up. But until then, email me, michelleshealinghome@gmail.com. If you'd like to place an order, you can head to my website as well, michelleshealinghome.com, for any other inquiries. You can sign up for the newsletter there, learn about consultations. You can read my blog. You can reach out to me and ask me a question, or you can call or text me 503-568-1569.
Nice. Cool. So I just did a stream on Monday with Old World Florida.
Yes, it was
Dr.
great.
Longo. And so he wanted to talk about Pisces and its connection to Florida. And so I was down. And so we talked about Pisces. And so I talked about some new stuff with Pisces I hadn't really mentioned anywhere else. To be honest, I really wasn't thinking about Pisces when he hit me up. But he thinks that there's a very strong correspondence with Pisces and Florida. And after talking to him and watching some of his videos and everything else, like I totally see it. I see where he's coming from with all of it. So if you guys are interested in that, you can either go to his channel or you can go to my channel, which is linked in the description. And you can check that out. Also, I released a podcast a couple days ago.
Woo!
Yeah, so I want to start doing audio-only shows, you know, amongst other things. It's not my exclusive thing or whatever, but it's just been a long time coming. And so I released my first episode. I talked to this fellow named G.B. Marion about Set, the Egyptian deity Set. And I got into this line of information because I found out that Set actually has a northern correspondence. So he's associated very heavily with Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, which is a northern constellation. And from there, I was like hooked. I was like, okay, I need to know more. What's going on here? Blah, blah, blah. And GB, he's been looking into Egyptology stuff like his whole life almost, you know, as since he was a teenager, basically. And he's actually part of a Setian coven. And so his whole sort of spiritual perspective has to do with Set. And so we sat down, we talked, and I think we had a good conversation. So if you guys are interested in that sort of material, I think you should give it a go. So I've read a couple of books about the tunnels of Set, and I've also talked to Juan about that, Juan on Juan. And so I have those shows on my channel as well, if you guys feel like going down that rabbit hole. But to me, it is interesting stuff, so I'm finding value in it personally.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
So excited that you launched that finally.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then for the rest of my stuff, symbolicstudies.com. If you guys are interested in tarot readings or prints or, you know, anything along those lines, check it out. I actually just relaunched my website too, so it's kind of new. And that'll do it, guys.
Yep. Thank you guys so much for hanging on a Thursday night with us.
Until next time.
It was fun as always.
For sure, for sure.
Thank you guys all in the chat. Thanks for contributing. Super fun.
Definitely.
Great insights.
I agree. All right, guys.
All right.
Check you later.
Later.
Bye.
Bye.